Today on Coco Disaster, I've got a brand new pair of roller skates, and you've got a brand new key. Hi, and welcome to Coco Disaster. I'm Chorpsoy.
And I'm Jay.
And today, I've brought my friend, the Jave Spade, here to talk, in this single serving, about a Paranoia Agent. I had originally planned for this to come out maybe a little closer to Halloween, but I don't remember how seasons work, but it's okay. Because it turns out maybe this wouldn't be it's not quite the same sort of, scary as I maybe thought it was originally.
I mean, it has some horror elements, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, it's not, it maybe doesn't fit the same sort of mood, I guess.
But hey, after watching it, I know what I'm dressing up as for Halloween.
Oh no. But, Paranoia Agent was, the one and only anime series by sort of famed director Satoshi Kon, who is probably known better for his movies like Perfect Blue or Paprika or Tokyo Godfathers. With this particular show, it was this sort of thing where he had ended up with a lot of unused ideas and kind of character arrangements and plots that he didn't use in any of his movies because movies have to be one specific thing through the 2.5 hours through the years of work, and he wanted to do something that was a little more flexible with his different ideas and his different plots that he wanted to do, something that could really take advantage of the episodic format so it's not always the same mood, the same tone throughout the entire work. So there's sort of this one major plot in this story with a bunch of kind of B and C plots kind of interspersed, and ultimately they play back into the main focal plot. But it may seem disconnected, or it may relate to characters that aren't right on the cusp of the actual story and mystery. So this was done also at Studio Madhouse, who also worked on all of Satoshi Kon's movies, and is They're a well respected anime studio, having done a lot of work throughout the years. And so this aired in Japan in 2004, and then a year later aired on Adult Swim with their own dub in 2005, with a few edits done to it, sort of to reduce sort of the violence and sort of the disturbing imagery, because this is definitely a show that sort of bases itself around more psychological horror and terror, and it's definitely unsettling. I understand why, even on Adult Swim, something, for an older audience, this would need to be toned down a bit.
Right.
But yeah, I wanted to do this just because it was it was a horror thing for what I had initially planned, but also I haven't really actually dived into the works of Satoshi Kon. It's sort of a thing that's kind of eluded me because I'm not super big on horror as a general genre, but the sort of psychological aspect of it kind of interested me. And he's so revered for his work on his movies that this was a good way to get into it and be able to kind of discuss it. And I think after this, I've actually gotten a lot more interested in seeing his other works, just to see what it's like when he's got kind of a more tightly focused idea that he's exploring.
Yeah. I wanted to watch this just so I'd stop confusing it with Psychopaths.
Just a similarly sort of styled show, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And sort of similar kind of name. I don't know. They're agents and psychopaths, I think.
It happens. But yeah, Paranoia Agent, very, very different.
Right, very different.
Very different writers, very, oof, wow. But, yeah, so Paranoia Agent was sort of like a curiosity, and, I guess one thing that has made it hard to get a hold of is that, like, the original rights holders ended up, folding, like, the company ended up folding, and, no one seems to have picked the license up again or done anything with it. So, like, all the DVDs have been out of print since, like, 2006, and there's no place to stream it online again because of this whole licensing issue. So it's just, like, a really hard show to get a hold of these days. So it's,
Yeah, just finding it's the scary part.
Yeah, wow. Oof. The real horror is all of the sites I had to visit to find it. Ugh. Yeah, so for this one, just to kind of give a more of a back and forth, because I noticed I've kind of dominated the other podcasts, is we're going to kind of do the recap and synopsis back and forth. So I'll do like episode 1 and Jay will do episode 2, like back and forth like that. And we both have sort of this huge list of characters because there's just a lot of people to keep track of, and all of them are at least marginally important because each episode sort of focuses on a different set of characters. So we're going to do our best to sort of keep them all together. We all have our notes to help keep track of all the different players in this story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so let's start right off. So episode 1 is Enter Little Slugger, which is sort of our introduction to the main plot and conflict going on in the story. And it opens up with this sort of scene, like a montage of people on the phone dealing with business, and sort of the main through line for all of their discussions is that they're all sort of placing blame for their work on other people. Like, oh, it's not my fault this happened. You can't make me take responsibility for this. Or like there's a guy in a truck who's just like, oh, traffic's so bad right now. I can't possibly make it there in time with the delivery. Sorry. And he's just like sitting in his truck parked on the side of the street.
Right. It's classic millennials before that was a term.
I can't believe them. But at the same time we end up cutting to a woman named Tsukiko Sagi, who is an illustrator at some kind of toy company. And she just ended up making this very successful mascot, like a dog creature named Moromi. And now she's been put under a lot of pressure from her boss to come up with a new design. And she's coming up on the deadline. She hasn't been able to come up with anything. And to make it worse, the workplace environment for her is kind of bad. A lot of the employees don't seem happy with her. They seem to think that success has gone to her head, and that's why she's being so obstinate about coming up with a new design.
Yeah, they're kind of catty. And Sagi is just sort of... She's very, like, plain and quiet, sort of.
Yeah, she seems withdrawn about this, like she doesn't seem comfortable with the fame that she's gotten either.
Mm-hmm.
And so she ends up going back on her way home, and she sort of... While she's going, she thinks to herself, she wishes for a miracle, something that would help get all of this stress off of her. She ends up running into this old woman digging through the trash. It's sort of this unsettling character, and the old woman ends up disappearing as Tsukiko Sagi kind of passes and looks back. And she freaks out and starts running back home and ends up tripping. And while she's on the ground, sort of like trying to gather her stuff, like her character sketches, she ends up attacked by this boy on roller skates with a crooked bat.
And a big smile.
And a big, creepy smile. And so it kind of cuts away right as the impact goes. And we find her now at the hospital. She's not dead or anything. She was just attacked, and I think her leg's broken.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, like, she's hit in the leg.
Yeah, it's at least taken some damage.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so she's now under care. She's being taken care of. Everyone's worried about her. And while she seems really shaken up, this comes across as sort of her ideal miracle in that no longer are people kind of bugging her to get this, to get this character figured out. This now, everyone's doting on her, kind of trying to make sure that she's okay.
She's got a lot of pressure off her shoulders. Yeah,
so that she's gotten attacked or something. I think she describes the character that went against her as like having it's a child with a baseball cap, a big smile, a crooked bat, and golden roller skates. Meanwhile, in the lobby, we meet a new character, and this is Akio Kawazu. And Kawazu is sort of this
he's a reporter.
This like gossip reporter.
Yeah,
he's a reporter for like a gossip magazine. And we find that he ended up in some way or another causing this older man great harm. I think it's like through a car accident or something.
Yeah, that's what I think.
And so he's forced to pay this man's hospital fees, and he's constantly trying to put it off and try to, skirt away blame for not having the money on time and not being able to make these payments. And so we see him, and then we see also these two detectives, Keiichi Ikari and Mitsuharu Maniwa, who are sort of investigating the case of Tsukiko Sagi. Keiichi seems pretty, like, suspicious of Tsukiko, like, oh, this seems really convenient that this person attacked and just ran away, and this seems very strange to him. And meanwhile, his partner, Maniwa, isn't so suspicious about it. It seems like, oh, this is just, sometimes kids act like this, they have problems.
And they even bet a dinner on it.
Yeah. So Kawazu, hearing over this attack and everything, kind of decides to kind of be like a vulture. He's sort of trying to find information now on this and get his way to get some information on Tsukiko and kind of, write his rag piece on her. And we get an idea of just how sort of like nasty he is, because he borrows a computer from a couple of kids, I think in the hospital, to get this information, and then to sort of like reward them for helping him out. He like downloads porn for them.
Yep.
Which, wow, oof. But and it's funny watching this because it is very sort of like early internet. Like they are downloading this picture of a naked lady off of like dial-up or something.
Right.
Because of how slow it seems to...
Like it comes in from the top, like somebody's like doing a curtain.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating to see sort of that almost like relic at this point. So, meanwhile, we see sort of this, we see a news report saying that just in general, juvenile assaults are on the rise, and a bunch of people are interviewed talking about why they think that kids are attacking people, sparked by this little slugger thing. I guess we didn't say that. I guess they're going to refer to this attacker as Lil Slugger. Mm-hmm. This comes later in this episode, but it's easier just to refer to him as that as we go along.
Or Shonen Bat, if you watch the original Japanese.
Yeah, if you watch in Japanese as Shonen Bat. But Lil Slugger is a really good localized name for that.
Yeah, I think I honestly like it better. This whole dub is actually very good.
Yeah, the voice acting is really well done. A lot of like really big names, people on it. And also, like, I think that the localization choices, like Lil Slugger gives an idea of sort of like a little bit of menace to it in the way that like Bat Boy wouldn't, if we just directly translated it.
Right. People would think he's like that dude from the tabloids or something.
Yeah. And, oh, right. I almost forgot about Bat Boy.
Honestly,
goodness.
It might have been a better anime.
Yeah. So they're sort of blaming these juvenile assaults on these juvenile assaults on the recessive society and sort of the troubles that Japan is having in general. And they interview some kids about it, and one of the kids is like, I think Little Slugger should play video games to help get it out, That's what I do. I don't get violent because I can be violent in video games. Meanwhile, other news stations are like, I think video games are the problem for this violence. Like, they're causing people to act out kind of thing. And so, someone to the detectives, notes that the old woman that Tsukiko had seen before was there at the time of the attack, and the two detectives go to interview her, and when they get there, they find that Kawazu was already there, claiming to be helping the investigation. And it seems like Kawazu and, like, Keiichi have sort of this history with each other. Like, they seem very... Like, Kawazu's like, oh, I'm helping the investigation. I'm just, working like you guys. And Keiichi's, like, very mistrusting of him and sort of, like, knows that he's sort of trying to meddle in this police business.
I mean, since he's a gossip reporter, it seems like something that he would have done before.
Right, just sort of, like, meddling his way into a case to, write some kind of, like, dirty story on it.
Mm-hmm.
Then we go and we see that Tsukiko has been let out of the hospital, and she's living back in her apartment, and she's on the internet, kind of looking up stories and, like, different online threads about this attack. And it seems like there's a lot of kind of mixed reaction. There are a lot of people supporting her, hoping that she gets well, and there are a lot of people calling bullshit on her and sort of, like, assuming that, she attacked herself or something else like that, and is stressing her out. She seems to be uncomfortable. But the Moromi doll that she has, her mascot character, comes to life, to which she's completely unfazed. It's really unsettling as this Moromi dog kind of gets up. And it's because the movement is very, like, kind of fat. Like, it has a lot of weight to it, as if it's sort of this horrible monster trying to learn to walk and stuff.
Right. Like, it looks like something is inside the doll moving it, and it's completely terrifying.
Yeah, and so Moromi tells Tsukiko that, don't worry about this. Everyone's just jealous of her sudden success and popularity. As long as, it's the truth that, that Tsukiko is telling, that's all that matters. Mr. Kawazu, in his sort of, like, investigation the next day, stops her on the street on her way to work and gets rejected, but he, at the crime scene, found one of her character sketches and uses it sort of, like, as a way to get this interview, like, I'll give this back to you if you give me some information. And he says he found it at the old woman's house. So Kawazu sort of does this interview with her, kind of doing a bunch of leading questions, trying to figure out the actual story. And through the whole thing, there's a lot of really sexual vibes coming off of him. Like, he gets like an ice cream shake during this thing and eats the cherry and then, like, bends the cherry into a knot with his tongue.
Mm-hmm. And
like, apropos of nothing.
Just licks the entire, like, side of the whipped cream on top. It's
really gross.
It's not pleasant.
Right, like, you especially get how, like, unprofessional and sort of scumbaggy he is from all this. So he talks to her and he's trying to do these questions and he's talking about sort of the work gossip that, that she's been a victim of, and eventually gets to the point where he starts pressuring her to admit that she did it herself, that, there was no attacker. And eventually she kind of, like, curls up and freaks out because she seems to feel the atmosphere of the assailant again. Seems to feel like Little Slugger's there again and sort of completely shuts down. But through this attack, she ends up with more information for the detectives. Like, she remembers more about the person who attacked her and everything. And with this extra information, suddenly more people start to believe her. Little Slugger info is passed along as both, like, gossip and as, like, legitimate news. And through this whole thing, Kawazu continues to stalk Tsukiko, hoping to get more material from her in order to write his piece, including going to her apartment directly. When she sees that he's at the apartment door, she runs away, feeling threatened, and Kawazu is sort of trying to keep up with her as she runs away. At some point during the chase, I guess, Tsukiko drops a handkerchief of hers, and when Kawazu stops to pick it up, he is attacked by Little Slugger. Then, not knowing this, Tsukiko keeps running and eventually trips again, and Lil Slugger kind of confronts her directly, just kind of appearing in front of her, and he just basically says, like, hello to her, like, or hello again, before he just skates off.
Wow, what a badass.
And that's how the first episode ends. So we're kind of introduced to our main characters. We have Tsukiko Sagi, the first victim and the creator of Moromi, which will come to be important later. And we meet Moromi, who is a sentient doll, it seems.
Right.
We meet Little Slugger, the attacker, and we meet the two detectives, Keiichi and Mitsuhiro, who will continue to be on this case.
Right.
So episode 2, Jay will take over, but it's called The Golden Shoes, and this is sort of the first spread of the Lil Slugger phenomenon.
Right. So episode 2 was before I took really detailed notes, so the only real notes I have is Tai from Digimon is an asshole. So let's set the scene. We've got a kid named, one second.
Yuichi Taira.
Yeah, Yuichi Taira. Ichi for short, which means one in Japanese.
Right, because he's number 1.
Right, he is number 1. He is the most popular kid in school. Everybody loves him. He's great at baseball with his cool golden bat. He always skates to school on his golden rollerblades.
And everyone wants him to be student council president.
Right, and also, he's got a winning smile.
Boy, does he. Every time he smiles, it's got a little sheen on it.
Right. Yeah, he's a popular student. Everybody wants him to be student council president. But you know, golden rollerblades, golden bat, big smile, sort of reminds you of Lil Slugger.
Yeah.
And it reminds everybody else of Little Slugger, and everybody thinks Ichi is Little Slugger.
So he walks into school one day and everyone is just, like, ignoring him. He doesn't have any love letters in his locker. And everyone sort of, like, accuses him immediately of being Lil Slugger.
Except for one person, Shogo Ushiyama, or Ushi for short, who is, he's a student that recently moved to the city from the country. He's kind of porky. He sweats a lot doing sports.
And he's poor. That's also something that's brought up.
He's poor. And Ichi fucking hates him.
He's so fucking sick of this kid. Kid's smart, and he's been getting a lot of attention as the new kid.
Mm-hmm. And he's also running for student council president. And he might win it because everybody thinks Ichi is the Little Slugger now. And Ichi he hates this guy.
Ichi even assumes that, like, Ushiyama spread some rumor about him towards the school as, like, an intimidation tactic.
Yeah.
And one thing we learn here about Ichi that will play in eventually later is that while he's smart, he does have a private tutor named Harumi Chono, who seems to be like a college aide, someone who's going for higher education past college.
Right.
And he just kind of complains to her about the whole thing.
Yeah. He seems to, like, take a lot of solace in her and just sort of, like, talks about his emotions.
Right. It seems like he can only really open up to Harumi.
And it's gonna be Ichi's birthday soon, and he really wants everybody to come to his party, especially Harumi.
Right. He seems to have the hots for Harumi.
Yeah.
And, I mean, while he doesn't want others to be involved in this whole situation, he doesn't want to talk about his issues, he knows that his reputation is just shot forever if nothing happens, and so he tries to handle it himself.
Mm-hmm. And so he takes Ushi behind the school and sort of roughs him up, and he's like, I know you've been spreading rumors about me being Lil Slugger. And, like, it doesn't seem like Ushi actually has anything to do with that.
Right, he's very scared from this attack, like...
Yeah, it doesn't even seem like the kid's got a bad bone in his body. But somebody takes pictures of them. Is it...
Someone takes a video of them on their like flip phone behind the school.
Right.
And starts sending it around to all of the students in the class.
I was just going to make sure it wasn't a named character. I didn't remember if
I don't think so.
Okay. But yeah. So like during class one day, everybody gets a message on their phone and it's just Ichi bullying Ushi outside of school. And like Ichi's reputation is just shot even more.
Just even worse.
But Ushi like stands up and he's like, oh no, somebody's trying to blackmail Ichi. We gotta do something about it. It just pisses Ichi off even more.
Right, like he thinks that Ushi's trying to do this like noble sort of thing to kind of like improve his look in front of people. And sort of like has these like weird pseudo hallucinations of just all of the students kind of like turning against him and, you know, Ushi being like, ha, this will really ruin him because now he's blackmailed and I look cooler.
Yeah. So then Ichi just starts wishing that like anybody would take out Ushi.
First he's pulled in for questioning. This is the birthday bit.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so Ichi is eventually pulled in for a questioning by the two detectives. And that, like, through the whole thing, it ends up that they drop him as a suspect. They don't believe that he's going to be Lil Slugger, even though he has the skates and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And he thinks he's in the clear now. Like, you know, the rumors are gone. You know, they've officially counted him out. So, like, why does anyone have to hate him anymore?
Yeah, but it turns out children can be cruel, and they start, like, vandalizing his, like, posters for running for student council.
Yeah, they draw him as Lil Slugger.
Mm-hmm, like, replacing his name on his cubby with Lil Slugger.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, aw, he's a poor kid.
And then no one comes to his birthday party.
Yeah, it's just Harumi and his mom. It's, like,
yeah.
Ichi is, like, a total prick and a half throughout this entire episode. But, like, I still kind of felt bad for him in these times.
Yeah, because, I mean, he doesn't deserve it. Like,
yeah, like, he's just a little kid.
Yeah, like, I have a note here, just like, there has never been a scene like this where I am happy that, like, an asshole gets their comeuppance. It, like, just really depresses me, the idea of an empty birthday party.
Mm-hmm. The only person who still even talks to Ichi is Ushi.
Right, and he fucking hates him.
Yeah, he just hates him so much. And they're walking home from school one day, and then Uchi gets hit by Lil Slugger. Just zooms down, and Ichi, he realizes this is his opportunity. If he catches Little Slugger, then nobody will think he's Little Slugger anymore.
Right, because, like, actually, people have been more suspicious of him as Little Slugger since the cops talked to him. Like, it got worse.
Right. So he runs after him. He just can't catch him. Like, he's just a little kid. He doesn't have rollerblades. What's he gonna do?
Right.
Well, I mean, he does have rollerblades. He just wasn't wearing them.
He threw them away earlier, in fact, just to, like, try to separate himself so much from being a Little Slugger.
Oh, right. So, now, like, basically everybody thinks he's Little Slugger, because, I mean, who hated Ushi more than just Ichi? And...
Right.
Ichi actually, like, just stays home. He doesn't go to school, and he starts, like, actually having, like, stress hallucinations.
Right, like, his mom forces him outside to go to school, and he knows that as soon as he leaves, everyone's just going to continue to sort of, like, bully him and treat him like a subhuman as if he is the attacker. And his hallucinations just gets super strong with the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Right, like, it gets super distorted, and then he sees Little Slugger, and bam-o, he gets it.
Yeah, he gets hit. Yeah, so, yeah, man. One thing about this episode also, Ichi's theme is maybe, like, the coolest song on the soundtrack.
Oh, yeah, it slaps.
Like, it's a really good sort of, like, kind of hip-hop-y sort of electronic beat. It's, like, really good. Unfortunate that it's for the biggest wiener in the cast.
I think this episode shows off some, like, really cool, like, just, like, editing and transition techniques that I really enjoy. Like, there's a part where Ichi like walks in, he sees Ushi's poster on the wall, and it's like a crayon drawn picture of himself. And then like he sees the picture start talking, but it's really actually just Ushi's right next to him.
Right. And then also like the cool transition of as kids walk by Ichi's campaign poster, a new drawing appears on it. Like, so there's these transitions where it kind of wipes with a character, and once they move away, you see more graffiti on his poster of him, people calling him like a murderer and drawing him as Little Slugger.
Right.
It's a cool little effect.
Yeah.
And also a bit where, sort of as Ichi chases Little Slugger down to try to capture him, he's stunned because he sees himself in Little Slugger.
Oh god, I forgot about that.
Yeah, like Little Slugger turns around and kind of comes at him, and he sees himself, and then Little Slugger disappears the first time. It's pretty wild.
Mm-hmm.
So episode 3 is Double Lips, and this is sort of where the cast connections become more defined. Sort of the secondary cast sort of starts to fit in between each other, and we see the first real exploration of one of Satoshi Kon's kind of more famous explorations in his works, which is sort of like the kind of distorted perception of reality versus fiction. Sort of the blurred line of what is and what isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And we open up episode 3 with this big fat otaku dude getting laid.
Oh, yeah.
And after he has sex with this call girl, he turns to his anime figures that are just lining his walls and shelves, just tons of them, and like congratulates them for watching him.
Well, no, it wasn't so much that for watching them. He was pretending that they were the ones he was having sex with.
Right, and he's like, oh, you did the best of all, as he picks up one of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like real and then in the background, the lady just walks away because he's so distracted now. But this woman's named Maria, and she works for like a call girl service. And so she's doing her rounds at night. And we find later, as she comes home, that Maria also happens to be Harumi, the tutor, wearing a wig and like a fake beauty mark and all these different things to sort of change her identity. And it comes across as sort of this multiple personality disorder sort of thing going on, because she's leading this double life. And the only way that Maria and Harumi seem to be able to contact each other is by leaving messages for each other. So, like, Harumi will leave a message that says, like, who are you? What are you doing in my body? And Maria will be like, oh,
it's my body.
Yeah, it's my body. I was here first. You need to come to accept it. And so there's definitely some kind of crisis going on with this girl. And so we see Harumi in sort of her everyday life. She works as like an aide to a professor. And she's also still visiting Ichi in the hospital to make sure that he's okay. And Ichi, ultimately, Ichi seems more or less happy with his predicament.
Right, like he's not really suspected anymore because he got slugged.
Right, like he specifically states something like, Little Slugger set him free because he got attacked. He can't possibly be the attacker anymore. He can't be the assailant. And meanwhile, the Keiichi, the detective, still believes there's some sort of connection back from Tsukiko to Little Slugger, and is trying to figure out how Tsukiko relates to Ushiyama, how it relates to Ichi. And so Harumi and Maria are kind of still at odds with each other. Harumi doing sort of her educational work in life, and Maria doing her call girl stuff. And the way that the messages and discussions between them go, it seems like Maria is almost like disappearing from the body and is using her final time to kind of enjoy herself, to live how she was. And and sort of hopes that Harumi will find where she's belong and be happy. And eventually, this teacher that Harumi works for, this professor, asks her to marry him.
Like, for the viewer, it's very out of the blue, and it's something that I really like. It almost feels like you spend more time getting to know who, like, Maria is just, like, working with than you do knowing this teacher that just asked to marry Harumi.
Right, and their relationship doesn't even seem like it's at all romantic or anything more than this girl works for him.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of comes out of nowhere. I was surprised, like, it took me a second to be like, oh, so this is a professor that she's working with. They're both, like, you start to make those connections yourself. So, Maria starts announcing to some of her, I guess, more popular clients that she's going to eventually quit her job and that she's going to leave forever.
Yeah, it seems to bum them out, kind of. But
yeah, there's one in particular who is sort of like this bigger dude who like refers to her as like his favorite, and like they kind of do some kind of like freaky shit at like as like a going away celebration.
Mm-hmm.
Like they do this weird role play thing. He's like, "Oh, call me daddy." But Maria's quitting her job. Harumi is sort of packing all of Maria's stuff away. And so there's a preparation for Harumi and the professor to get married. But Maria ends up coming back after Harumi throws all of Maria's stuff away. And she leaves a message saying how much she just does not appreciate Harumi's attempt to get rid of her so suddenly.
Right. And how, like, she talks about how she's the real one.
Right. And so there's sort of this, and so it sort of becomes a little more hostile between the two of them.
Right. They're both throwing each other's junk into the trash, and
it's really complicating this whole marriage thing, you know?
Right.
First of all, this dude's way boring.
Yeah. He's a lot older, he's a lot more boring, and Harumi hasn't even told him about her psychological stuff.
Right. We see her later, like, with a doctor, and this is like, yeah, I haven't told this guy about the fact that I have this multiple personality issue, which we see a little bit earlier in the episode, sort of, you know, talking about her relationship with Maria to this doctor. And, you know, doctor says that for support, she should probably talk to him about it. But, you know, she seems very uncomfortable with it. And here's something I didn't realize. I guess in Japan, there's an option to do picture-only weddings. So sort of like you get the dress and the outfit, and then you just take pictures as if you did the whole ceremony and everything.
Right, but you just do it at like a courthouse, sort of.
Right, which is nice for academics on the cheap. You know, they're working in academia. They're not getting a lot of money.
Right. Who can afford a wedding?
Yeah, honestly, in this economy? So, it seems that, you know, Harumi's troubles are definitely more showing. Like, when she goes to visit Ichi, she's sort of, like, dozing off, and Ichi even notes that, like, you don't look that good. Are you okay? So, you know, Harumi's having these issues, and eventually just, like, boxes all of Maria's stuff and, like, drives it out to the dump and, like, hides it in a pile of boxes now that, Harumi is looking to move in with her husband. And so we start having this issue where Maria is, like, actively invading Harumi's life by sort of, like, meddling in Harumi's contacts and, like, calling people. You know, things go straight to Harumi's phone instead of the second phone that Maria had set up specifically for the, like, call girl stuff.
Right.
And yeah, it's kind of going wild, and it's really affecting Harumi. You know, they both wish clearly to have separate lives now that Maria's back in full force. Maria won't let up on what she's doing to sort of, like, hurt Harumi. And it's just getting to this whole huge point with this just completely extreme episode where, like, it seems like Harumi and Maria are fighting each other, but it's just this huge kind of, like, episode of her having this this identity crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And which ultimately leads to her kind of stumbling out, kind of like half dressed as Maria and just whacked by Lil Slugger. Which leads to a shot of the answering machine at the phone just saying that all the messages have been deleted. So we now have a connection in the crimes between Ichi and Harumi.
Right.
So, Mitsuhiro, the other detective, sort of notes that, these are getting further away from Tsukiko, because Tsukiko hadn't made contact with either of these characters.
Right.
And he also notes that it seems like everyone has looked really relieved after their attacks. Like, everyone seems kind of happy that Lil Slugger has attacked them.
Well, except for Ushi.
Except for Ushi, but it seems like for the most part, they're...
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, we sort of pan out and we see Harumi living a normal life with her husband, sort of like everything seems calm, like a good average home life. And they are watching the news, and an arrest has been made on Lil Slugger. Meanwhile, we see Tsukiko back in her apartment, who is fully healed now, and talking to Moromi, she notes that it's good news that Lil Slugger got arrested, because now there's undeniable proof that Lil Slugger, is real. Like, no one ever has to question this again.
Right. Does Harumi's husband even get a name?
No, as far as I know, Harumi's husband doesn't get a name. He's that boring.
Like, he's that inconsequential.
Yeah. Like, he's there for he's there for Harumi's conflict, but as a character, he's not there basically at all. Yeah, but, so we go a little bit back in time because the arrest on Little Slugger has not happened in episode 4.
Right.
In episode 4, A Man's Path, it follows how they capture Little Slugger.
Right. It starts off with, one of, Harumi's clients? What?
Yeah, I think
He's
Maria's,
talking...
main squeeze, I guess.
Right. He's a police officer. He's one of those, those Japanese cops that just sort of, sit in that tiny building? He's one of those.
His name is Masami Hirokawa.
Right. And, he's talking to Detective, Kiichi, Ikari, and it seems like they have a bit of a rapport. They've probably known each other for a long time since they've been on the force for a while together. They talk about how Masami's building a house for him, his wife, and his 17-year-old daughter.
But yeah, he finally got enough money to get his house built. This has sort of been his dream, is always to build a house.
Mm-hmm. And he got it by keeping his nose clean, doing the right thing, working for the Yakuza, taking bribe money.
Yeah, it seems like he's sort of giving info to the Yakuza so that they don't get captured when they're doing some kind of prostitution ring.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's like, you pay me so that I don't tell the cops, and also, I don't know, find me a woman, that I can see on the side.
Right. And,
he's got a real daddy thing, because this is the same character from before, with a real daddy thing.
Mm-hmm. So, eventually, Yakuza comes a-calling, and it's one of the... What are they calling? I was playing Yakuza 0, and I don't remember what the...
But one of the heads of the family.
Yeah, one of the heads is getting married, and Masami... Wait, what?
So it's Makabe. Makabe.
Okay.
Is the head of the mafia.
Right.
Or the Yakuza.
Makabe asked Masami for, what is it?
2 million yen.
2 million yen, which is what? 10,000? 20,000?
$20,000.
Yeah, and,
as a wedding present.
Right, for a wedding present. Because, he's gotten so much money from the Yakuza, surely he can give a little back. But
right.
he can't, because he's spent all his money building his dream house. So,
So Makabe threatens to burn Masami's house down if he can't do it. And as soon as, like, Masami tries to, like, negotiate, he puts out a cigarette on Masami's forehead. It's really fucked up.
yeah.
So he's given 3 days to make this 2 million yen.
And this whole time, Masami is like just absolutely obsessed with like this manly sort of Fist of the North Star style manga with like a hero who says slightly cryptic things about being a man.
Right, called A Man's Path. So
Right.
that's the connection to the, yeah.
And so Masami decides that the thing that a man must do is rob little old ladies who just got their money from Social Security.
Right.
He dresses up in like a red tracksuit and puts like a pink ski mask on. This is very much what I'd wear to work out.
Right.
He's got like a little tiny bicycle that he just rides up and snatches the purses. And
It's really wild because he's just like pumping himself up to steal from this granny.
Mm-hmm. And he does it, and he finally gets enough money for the wedding present.
Well, he gets half of it.
Oh, he gets half.
He's like, okay, I'll pay in installments. I just got 1 million yen. Give me some more time. And the boss then says that because the guy who's getting engaged, Honda, is in the hospital, he's going to need another million. So now it's back to 2 million.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we see Masami sort of like reading through A Man's Path, like in the drugstore. And it feels like it's following his life, sort of the struggles of this main character. And he feels like he has to comply in sort of the same way. That this is, a man's way of life.
Mm-hmm. Right. And he keeps stealing from people. Like, eventually it even gets on the news that there's, like, a ski mask bandit stealing purses from just random people on the street.
Right, like, he starts actually breaking into people's houses and stuff, and, like, everything's gone topsy-turvy for him because he's had such a comfortable life up to this, sort of, like, kind of exploiting the Yakuza, and now he's so caught up in this that he can't stop because everything would fall apart as soon as, like, he went against the Yakuza.
Right. Eventually, the Yakuza ask for, like, a lot of money, and from...
It just continues to rack up the debt. Like, as soon as he pays it off, it's like, we need more.
Right. And I think they ask from, like, a specific person, or is it... I think it's a specific person because he knows where, like, the safe is and stuff in their house.
Right.
And, like, he's, like... He thinks that he can't even do this, but the Yakuza give him, like, I don't know, some sort of drug that basically... like, hypes him up enough.
I assume it's some kind of, like, illegal drug that's just supposed to sort of, like, loosen his inhibitions.
Mm-hmm.
Because he starts getting so brave that he's breaking into occupied apartments and, like, threatening people to get their stuff.
Yeah, like, I think he, like, ties them up and holds them up at gunpoint. And then, like, this old couple's daughter walks in, and
she's like, who are you? And he turns and he's like, call me daddy! And it's implied that he definitely raped this child in the midst of his, like, drug-induced, like, theft. It's real. He's clearly, like, gone past the point of no return where he's just, like, so caught up in this, like, theft and illegal activity that he's just lost all of his inhibition.
But he still, like, pictures himself as, like, this heroic, manly man who's got a shaved head and very good abs. This money is the lady I am saving from these thugs who are just, like, a pair of old people that have been saving money for a while.
And he's sort of, like, he's while he's lost his inhibition, he keeps doing it. It's very much broken him. Like, his resolve is just shot. Like, he almost keeps calling out for people to catch him.
I think that the ending of this episode is actually the perfect reimagining of Jim Carrey's The Mask, because it's a guy in a mask yelling, "Somebody stop me."
Christ.
I've been saving that joke for a while.
So after this case, he is stopped by Keiichi, like in a park outside that apartment complex where
Yeah, like he's just laughing to himself. He's got a briefcase full of money. He's like still pretty high.
Yeah, and Keiichi stops by and they go to a bar together and sort of Keiichi's maybe a little suspicious of the whole situation with Masami, but there's nothing to go off of. So he's just kind of takes the time to talk about his frustrations with the little slugger case.
Mm-hmm. And they talk about the way things used to be, right?
Right. It's sort of like Keiichi finds so much important in finding motives as part of a case because that's how you catch someone. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't know if he can believe in the idea that there's just no motive in this, like these are just random attacks. And Keiichi and Masami kind of come to this conclusion that it's like a generational thing, that the lack of a clear motive just causes them to act out and sort of like a vie for attention.
Right. And then once they leave, Masami is hit by Little Slugger. What? I mean, he's also like crying in the street because of the horrible things he's done.
And then Little Slugger slams into him and he falls over and
But what's this? Masami gets up and he's like, "Hey, you little piece of shit, get back here!" And he catches Little Slugger.
Yeah, it's kind of hilarious the way he starts like beating the shit out of this kid because the kid can't run away fast enough. And ultimately, Masami arrests Little Slugger. He's kind of a hero,
and he becomes a hero. I think his debt is fully paid off to the Yakuza at that point. So. Yeah, he's a hero, and I think it goes back to even where Cho was watching it on TV with her husband.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so Little Slugger has been arrested now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the twists and turns.
And episode 5, The Holy Warrior, is the interrogation with Little Slugger, also known as Makoto Kozuka, who is a second year in junior high.
I also have the first notes for this episode for me are "how bizarre!" ! I
mean, this episode is definitely like the weirdest so far.
It's also probably one of the goofiest episodes. I think
it's very goofy. So Keiichi and Mitsuhiro are interrogating this kid, and he's a little bit like of a chunibyo. He's doing this thing where like he's referring to himself as the Holy Warrior, and he's defeating this evil force. It's very
Dragon Quest,
Dragon Quest adjacent. I think in fact the name of the like big evil that he fights is a reference to the main villain in the first Dragon Quest.
Mm.
But he's talking about like saving people, and he calls himself the Holy Warrior. And Makoto has found this way to connect the video game The Holy Warrior to his real life. And so he believes that he's attacking people who were possessed by evil. And it's this kind of fun sort of thing where the more he talks about this, he starts to like create this world that the landscape changes, and no longer are they in the interrogation room. They're in sort of this fantasy world, and he is donned in Holy Warrior gear, and his bat is a sword, and Keiichi just has like no patience for this at all.
But Maniwa gets into it.
Yeah, Mitsuhiro Maniwa is like, he's got like the guidebook for the game to try to like connect to this kid, and he's like, "Oh, this is this, and this is this," and like, Makoto Little Slugger is giving them these classes and sort of changing their gear. It's a very goofy and sort of like fun way of recounting these like civilian attacks.
Mm-hmm. Also, it gets sort of weird because like it's very clear at one point that it's like, okay, these are not like the characters talking in the real world about this thing, because they start acknowledging like the fantasy world that they are now a part of, and it's
right.
It's sort of bizarre because it feels like it's kind of hard to tell. not exactly what's real anymore, but it just like feels like there's a lot
where
of
that
blurring.
line blurs. Yeah. I think that this plays with that idea of sort of the reality versus fiction sort of thing in a fun way, whereas everything else in the show treats it in a very terrifying way. This is just like a fun, goofy, like, they start to acknowledge this idea and, like, you know, he's bringing in all of these different characters. Like, there's been this old man in the hospital throughout all the different episodes who has been sort of hinting at each of the attacks. Like, he's, like, this old man in previous episodes is, like, sitting in the parking lot writing big math equations, and the solution at the end is somehow related to the attacker. Like,
I mean, that the one who's attacked.
The victim. Yeah, the victim, sorry. So, like, in the first one, it's, he writes 510, and that's the apartment number of Tsukiko Sagi. And in episode 2 with Ichi, his solution comes out to 1, because, you know, Ichi. And, like, even in Harumi Chono's situation, he's, like, drawing out animals, and for her, he draws out this butterfly that's, you know, white on one side and black on the other, sort of this duality sort of thing. And he's referred to as the ancient master, who's giving Little Slugger all of these clues for who to attack next, like who's cast by evil.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, at the time with Little Slugger, he's hoping to find an old woman who is the homeless woman from before who knew of the great evil. And they keep referring to this evil as something that isn't of this world, you know, something supernatural that's causing these people in real life to be cursed, and he's the one who has to save them. Which you can kind of buy into because of the fact that they're, you know, dealing with these crises in their life for the most part.
Right. It sort of makes sense in a weird way.
Yeah, like, it works out in a way that's like, this kid clearly, you know, has some problems, but sure, you could see where this comes from. And Mitsuhiro continues to follow Little Slugger's metaphor and sort of, like, plays along in a lot of ways. Like, he's doing kind of the goofy language and everything, and he's following along with the story, and Keiichi's just like, what the fuck are you talking about? Tell me the truth, you know, just like, let's not make this flowery, just tell me what the truth is. And that's kind of it, is just this, like, pseudo recap episode about all the different attacks that happen.
Right, so if you missed the first 4 episodes, you could catch up with this one and be very confused.
Yeah, and so it's sort of just like a recap of the events from this different perspective to sort of see what Makoto sees himself as when he's an assailant. And what's great is at the end, sort of like, he's going off to fight the big evil, and just immediately he gets, like, smushed and just dies, and that's how he gets caught, is, like, the idea that he fought against an enemy too strong and it just destroyed him.
Right, he lost all his levels.
Right.
He forgot to save.
So by the end, Keiichi's just, like, fucking tired of this whole thing. And Mitsuhiro more or less gets it. You know, Maniwa gets it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that's that episode. It's just sort of the interrogation and just, like, sort of more about sort of where the blending of reality and fiction goes, because this also plays into the idea that, oh, you know, video games cause violence. You know, it's causing these people to act out because they see a relationship between it and real life. Like, they can't tell the difference between reality and fiction.
Yeah.
And that leads us into episode 6, which is,
oh boy,
it's pretty dark. It's called Fear of a Direct Hit.
So this episode introduces us to one of the last characters that's shown in the intro. Wait, let me find her name.
The girl with the sun hat.
Right.
Taiko.
Also, the intro is very good. I watched it every time I watched an episode.
Yeah, it's so I guess rolling it back a little bit. So the intro is, like, really unsettling and in an interesting way, because it's a very upbeat song, but all the lyrics are about sort of, like, natural disasters and, like, you know, kind of the mushroom cloud, like typhoon coming through, sort of this death destruction, and all the visuals are just, like, sort of natural disasters happening in the background while all of these characters just laugh.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all of the major characters. It's unsettling, but it's a fun song, and
it stays with you.
Yeah.
I think it's like the perfect way to set up like what you're about to see for the episodes.
Right, that it's sort of like uncomfortable and it's kind of strange.
So, we start with this girl. What's her name again? Whoops.
Taiko.
Well,
because we start out with a typhoon.
Oh, right. A typhoon coming into the city.
Right, it seems like it's going to hit the mainland, so, there's a lot of stuff going on with, people taking protection and sort of like going into bunkers.
Right. And Taiko is on the phone with somebody who she seems very cross with. And then it flashes back, right, to her as a child.
Yeah, and we find through the use of the voice that she is the child of Masami, the corrupt cop.
Right, and she's a very affectionate child. She loves her daddy very much. She
talks about wanting to marry him as a kid.
Right, she talks about wanting to marry him and how, and she doesn't even want to, move out of her parents' room and, into a nicer house. She's just happy being with them, and she just loves them and trusts them so much. And one day, on
the phone, she's acting hostile to whoever's on the other side of the line, sort of like, "Don't call, I don't want to talk to you, I'm sick of this," you know, that kind of thing. Kind of denies her home and wishes that it would disappear.
Right.
And in the meantime, there's also this good cop, bad cop thing going on with Keiichi and Maniwa, because they're talking to the old homeless lady.
Mm-hmm.
Since Makoto referred to her, and sort of she's popped up in a couple other cases, and she has Tsukiko's bag from the attack, the one with all the sketches and everything.
Right. And I think
so through this conversation, while it seems like this lady is more concerned with her granddaughter who sort of ran away from home and whether or not she's safe, she admits at some point to Keiichi and Maniwa that that Tsukiko was alone on the night of the attack.
Right.
And eventually, while this interview is happening and we get to that revelation, the old lady's tent house blows away from the typhoon, and sort of, they can't have this conversation anymore because it's just everything's in shambles because of the storm.
Right. And so we're back in the flashback, and it's
Taiko.
I was gonna say Akita, but I think that's a type of banana. Taiko. It's her father's birthday. She's in high school, and she sort of blows off her friends who want to go to karaoke, but she's like, no, I gotta do something special for my dad's birthday. So she has a picture, and she wants to make it her dad's background on his computer. So she's on
print out a birthday card.
Right. But she's on her dad's computer, and she sees something, I think it's either in the recycling bin or near it, it's on the computer.
Next to the recycling bin.
Right. On the computer, not in the real life. But she clicks it, and it's pictures of her in various states of undress, clearly taken within her room.
Yeah. And so she panics and sort of tears her room apart in a fit, trying to figure out where the camera is. And it turns out it's behind her bookcase.
Yeah, and she just smashes it. I think she even tears it out of the wall.
Yeah, which now the fact that that Masami has a daddy thing gets even more apparent. It's
yeah. It's I guess this is why it's his dream home. Oof.
Yeah. And so in the middle of this, we also see Keiichi and Maniwa talking, and Keiichi's like, "Oh, my intuitions were correct, Lil Slugger is," and he refers to it as a shadow of a shadow, and that Makoto was just a copycat attacker who was caught attacking this guy, and clearly he's not the same, given that there was this whole, given that he didn't, finish the job or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So Keiichi brings Tsukiko back in for questioning. under the guise of continuing to identify the attacker in sort of this lineup, because also all the other attacked parties have been coming in and sort of identifying the one, Makoto as Little Slugger.
Right.
And so we kind of move back and forth now between Keiichi sort of like pushing back against Tsukiko and trying to get the truth out of her, with Taeko sort of having this breakdown on a bridge as the tsunami gets, or as the typhoon gets closer.
Yeah, like she's about to like kill herself. She doesn't know what to do. But she sees the old lady drowning in like the river below her. It's just rain.
But envisions it as herself to start. She thinks that it's just her in the water as well.
Mm-hmm. But then she realizes it's the old lady,
and the old lady gets pulled away with the water, which is
oh yeah. And so she like calls for help, and she's like calling her dad and just like, I want to forget it. I want to forget everything.
Yeah, I want to become nothing, I think is the phrase also used.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this parallel between Taeko and Tsukiko right now with sort of their desires to forget and escape, because, the Keiichi's pushing on Tsukiko to admit, that she lied about this and she's uncomfortable, and Taeko's uncomfortable with the knowledge that her dad's a disgusting pervert.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, Taeko is attacked.
Mm-hmm. By Little Slugger. And you see the dream home get crushed by like debris from the storm. Like a
mudslide happens.
Yeah. But at the same time, Sagi just like, she's in the middle of questioning with the detective, and she like jerks to the side like she's just been hit with a baseball bat and falls to the ground.
She goes flying at the same time Taeko is hit. Like, Tsukiko just like, it's amazing how much force seems to be behind this. Like, it couldn't be faked.
Yeah.
Is what you get from it. And so the typhoon passes at the end, and we find Taeko in the hospital, and her father's there to sort of make sure that she's okay. And when she wakes up, he sort of apologizes for everything he's done, and
says that the house was destroyed. Like,
like what you wanted happened. The house was destroyed. And Taeko turns to him and just asks, "Who are you?" And so her wish, I guess, came true. Mm-hmm. She forgot everything.
Right.
It's a wild episode, not only in sort of like building off sort of the uncomfortable like character moments with Masami from earlier, but also like, showing kind of the dangers of the whole thing, and, building up these very desperate scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
And we find out that clearly Makoto isn't Little Slugger.
Right, he's still in jail, so he can't be like the real Little Slugger, if there even is such a thing as the real Little Slugger.
Yeah, and so it's wild, because I think this is the first time that's like, like episode 5 is like weird that they wrapped up the story this quick, and episode 6 is like, not yet.
Right, not so fast.
Yeah, there's still a lot of stuff to
Columbo's like, just one more thing. If you would, never mind.
I get it. So then we have episode 7, Megahertz. And this is...
like getting hit by a bat, am I right?
Woof! God damn it. So, this is the sort of episode where some of the truth begins to emerge. And so, Tsukiko is unconscious in her, in the interrogation room, and the detectives have just discovered about Little Slugger's attack on Taeko. And then Tsukiko kind of, wakes up and states that Little Slugger was here. Little Slugger was the one who attacked her in that room.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we kind of see sort of a pan across all of the victims of Little Slugger, and they all have very uncomfortable smiles.
Right.
Like, they all seem way too happy with how things have turned out.
Yeah, like they're not moving. They just have like this weird sort of smile upright position. It's
Yeah. But it doesn't matter. It's not their case anymore. They finished their part, and it's time for the detectives to head out. They're dealing with a whole different thing.
Mm-hmm.
As they head out, Mitsuhiro sort of has this kind of unsettling conversation with the old man that doesn't really go anywhere, but sort of like it's still like the old man sort of like cryptic speech that he's been doing. And Mitsuhiro's the one or Maniwa. I guess I should call him Maniwa. That is the name they use for him more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Maniwa is there to experience it, but they go and they're still trying to get info out of Makoto, trying to get him to crack, since they know that he's not the real attacker. They want to know the truth behind his situation in the whole thing. And meanwhile, we cut away throughout the episode to someone in an abandoned room, sort of like it seems like sending out like low frequency radio messages, sort of like this almost subliminal message sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we won't know about that for a while, but Makoto ends up under pressure admitting that he only attacked Ushiyama and Masami, and those are the ones who were sort of like different
outliers.
Yeah, outliers in the attacks, sort of like they didn't have the same situation, they didn't have the same sort of response to their attacks. And ultimately, Maniwa ends up questioning the victims to see if there's a connection now back to Tsukiko, because we're now back on that idea now that they haven't found it. And Maniwa comes to the conclusion that everyone who was properly attacked was dealing with some kind of problem or significant like psychological issue at the time, sort of like they felt cornered.
Right.
And while he finds that, Keiichi is kind of he's not convinced. He points out that like the circumstances of all of the attacks are too specific to be coordinated. Like, how can you know when someone's on the brink? And then he starts getting really violent with Makoto in the interrogation to try and find the logic in this case that connects everything together.
Right. He's pushing Makoto to an edge.
And Makoto just kind of thought Little Slugger was cool and wanted to follow along. Like, he's like, oh man, that guy's cool. He's just like hitting people. I want to do that.
Yeah. To be fair, Little Slugger is very cool.
Right. And we start to see Maniwa sort of like, it seems like he's cracking under the pressure to find his own answers, since Keiichi doesn't believe him. He's sort of like, he's starting to have dreams of...
Yeah, like weird hallucinations.
Of like the old man, and he hears Makoto sort of like asking him to take him there. Like everything's coming back to this old man. And he's starting to see like, he's starting to see these things as like a vision. And he's trying to make these claims to Keiichi, who just tells him to take a vacation, since it seems like the case is really getting to him and he needs some time off. And as Maniwa goes to kind of drive home, he realizes that the next logical case, if he's correct, the next logical step in the Little Slugger attacks is Makoto, who's been cornered and sort of like, he's been cracked, he's been under all kinds of pressure. So he calls Keiichi up and tells them that they have to go to the precinct. Against everything else, they have to get there now, and if it's wrong, Maniwa will take the blame for it.
Mm-hmm.
But he's going into the precinct with his gun at the ready, and they run into Little Slugger. And Little Slugger has blood on his bat this time, and he sort of smiles right before disappearing through a wall. And they look into the cell, and the door is opened, and Makoto's dead.
Yeah. This is the first casualty of the show.
Yeah, this is the first death that's happened, and it happened because of the Slugger, and none of the other attacks have been like this before, so it's unsettling. But ultimately, because this person died in police care, a lot of the people from that division have to resign due to this negligence, which includes Keiichi and Maniwa. And Maniwa sort of has this moment where he's feeling cornered as he sort of, he's down in the dumps after his after his firing, and he thinks he's attacked, but it's a dream again. He's continuing to have hallucinations related to this case.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that throughout this episode, the man who's been on the radio is in fact Maniwa, who seems to have gone mad or, has kind of lost his cool, trying to relay all of this info that he's gathered about the whole thing, that you can't be cornered or he's going to attack you. Like, he's always there. These sort of crazy things through his radio signals. And that's where the episode ends, and sort of where the main plot sort of takes a sideline for a bit.
Yeah.
It's not to say that these are filler episodes coming up, but the next 3 episodes are sort of they pull back even further from sort of the connection to this little slugger case, whereas we've had a bunch of kind of stories based around characters that are going to be directly related. We're going to start seeing more ancillary stories that sort of build up Little Slugger as a public nuisance or as a force to be reckoned with.
Right.
And the first one is I guess it's a funny episode.
Yeah,
this is
it's sort of
happy family planning.
Right. It's a bit of a goofy character. We start off with 3 new characters. We haven't seen them before. Fuyabachi, who is an old man. Kamome, who is a little girl, probably 7 or 8 or so.
Very young, yeah.
Yeah, and then Zebra, who's a man, probably in his mid-20s or so.
Maybe early 30s. And they seem to be big Moromi fans.
Yeah, they've all got Moromi backpacks.
And it shows them kind of talking on an IRC channel, trying to meet up.
Yeah, and so they meet up, and Fuyabachi and Zebra are there together, and they see Kamome, and they realize, oh, she's a little girl, and they start running from her, which is really weird. She knows that they're from the form because they're wearing the backpack. And
yeah, he's oh, so you're Fuyabachi and you're Zebra. And Fuyabachi is just super uncomfortable with the idea that their internet friend is such a young girl, and so they sort of run away from Kamome and try to keep a distance from her so that she'll eventually give up.
Mm-hmm. So they find themselves in an abandoned building, and they're setting up for what I can only assume is a final meeting, because they start getting out stuff to kill themselves.
Right, it's a weird group suicide thing. It turns out that IRC is a group suicide pact channel.
Yeah, just hey, suicide tips, stuff like that. It's
and so they start just eating a ton of pills.
Right. Fuyabachi actually takes 1 pill before they even start the whole thing.
Right, which seems maybe a heart medicine thing or something that's actually for his health. Right before he commits suicide. So.
Yeah, it seems like it's his last one, so maybe he knows that he's got something going on.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But yeah, they start taking a lot of pills. They start inhaling smoke or toxic fumes. And then
they're doing a lot.
Yeah, they're trying to speed up this process.
They even and then they're ready to fall asleep, kind of let the drugs take in and let them die. And oops, Kamome found them.
Yes.
And she's ready to die. She has made it very clear that she is super ready to die.
Right. She does not want to be a part of this mortal coil any longer. But basically, as soon as she finds them, the building starts getting busted into by construction workers.
Yeah, like a crane comes in and just knocks a bunch of shit above them, and they're kicked out.
Yeah. So they're on the street, and they're well, how are we gonna commit suicide now? Our place is getting demolished. And they come up with the idea, get hit by a train. We'll just jump in front of the train. And so they...
But Fuyabachi plans to, throw Kamome back right before they jump so that she's still not dead. Fuyabachi's still super against this child.
Yeah, Fuyabachi, Zebra do not want Kamome to die. She's just a little girl.
Right. So they've all lined up to jump in front of this train, and they're talking about sort of like the logistics of it, like how fast the train's going, what it's going to look like.
Mm-hmm. Holding hands, and right before the train comes, some other guy just runs and jumps in front of the train.
Yeah, and so they're like, suddenly they're like so shocked that they didn't jump. Yeah. And so, we missed our chance this time.
Like, they see it and they're like, that's not how I want to go.
Yeah, they're like, that's not clean. Like, they want a clean way to die.
Yeah. And Fuyabachi takes Kamome and they leave, and Zebra's, like, still shocked and staying behind, and he sees the guy get up, like, covered in blood, just, like, rubbing his head, and like, I didn't expect that to hurt so much.
Right, so it's like, wait, what the fuck? But I guess, he walks away.
Yeah. And so they actually just take a train.
Yeah, like Kamome, they start talking about whether or not Kamome has any regrets since she's so young. And Kamome's big regret is that she hasn't gone on like a long train ride, just to enjoy it. And so they all just decide to go up to the mountains.
Yeah. And they take a train to the mountains. They're having a good time. They're setting up ropes and nooses and stuff.
It turns out they're doing a group hanging.
Yeah. But Fuyabachi gets Zebra to, like, cut Kamome's rope a little bit so that when she tries to hang herself, it'll just break and she'll just be next to two dead men in the middle of the forest.
Cool. But the issue is when it comes down to it, they're all standing on, like, rocks so they can kind of kick it away once they, and start choking.
Mm-hmm.
But they start to have this, like, hesitance, maybe, like, a small crisis, because they haven't decided who's going to give the signal to jump. Like, none of them decided, who's going to decide when we all commit suicide, and they start losing their footing.
Yeah, Kamome just starts yelling, jump, 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 and jumping up and down. And it actually causes the tree branch to break.
Right.
And her rope breaks, and Zebra and Fuyabachi are just chased down the mountain by this big branch. They just, like, completely, like, just bowled over.
Right,
they
Kamome's
run into the woods.
Breaks, so she's still there.
Yeah.
But the other two have gone down with this.
Yeah. And so, like, they take a tumble, but they're still ticking.
And they're still, like, in the noose, so they're like, finally, we can kill ourselves on our own. But they also feel bad because, like, Kamome is still gonna be there. We can't do that.
Yeah,
like, it's on our conscience.
She's, like, climbing down the hill. She's, like, so sad. She's like, hey, you guys.
Yeah, and she admits that she just doesn't want to be alone. Like, that's the real kicker of the whole thing. She wants to go out with others, I guess, probably just because of, like, a really, like, disjointed family life.
Mm-hmm. And so, Fuyabachi decides that, like, hey, if we're gonna kill ourselves, we might as well get our bodies all clean, like, be fit, like, a body and mind. So, hey, let's go to a hot spring. Like, they check into, like, a little hotel sort of thing.
Yeah, like an outdoor bath, and they all kind of, soak, they enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. And they start talking about their IRC again. And they talk about this guy online, Fox, who's like basically been like the one to like give them all the suicide tips,
all these cool tips on how to die. And it turns out like Fox wanted to do something sensational before he died, and he ended up dying before these other three. And actually, it turns out Fox was Makoto.
Yeah.
Which is wild, because that's also another child using a suicide IRC.
Mm-hmm.
And they all just go like, wow, it must be nice being dead.
Yeah, they're like super into it.
And it also seems like they've been tuning in somehow to these radio transmissions from Maniwa, and all this information about Little Slugger, about sort of like, how he comes for cornered people and stuff like that.
Right. They try to put themselves into a corner.
And they're just so jealous of this dead guy.
Yeah. They just want to be dead so bad. And then, like, oh, what's this? Somebody else in the bath is, like, they have they get cornered, and they get bonked by a Little Slugger. And so
Little Slugger is just killing so many people in this hotel.
Yeah, like they must have like terrible ratings on Yelp. Like
I got
Gordon
murdered
Ramsay
here, 1
tried
star.
to save it, but like no, these people are just like pushed to their brink by like the terrible linen or something. Like something.
Welcome to the real hotel hell.
Yeah. And so Fuyabachi, Kamome, and Zebra just start chasing after Little Slugger. Who
Please kill me, Little Slugger.
He we get a lot of emotion from Little Slugger in this scene, which is like something you don't see.
Right, Little Slugger has been smiling the whole time and attacking, but like he gets creeped out by these characters. And they end up chasing him away because they're too eager to die. Like, he is not ready for people to just be like, oh, kill me, Little Slugger, oh.
But yeah, he runs away. And I think it's like the next day and they are like about to get back on the train or something.
They're kind of like sitting at like a 7-Eleven or something, kind of lamenting the fact that they couldn't die.
Right. And Fuyabachi like checks his pills and he realizes that he took his pill like the day before, but when he checks his pills, he's still got one more pill left. And then he starts sort of like freaking out and like a very like dramatic way. He like looks around at like all these like ravens surrounding them.
Yeah, we get this cool like sort of first person perspective for the camera, and we see that as he's sort of panicking looking around, none of the 3 of them have shadows. And nothing really comes out of that. Like, at the end, it's just like, Zebra is like, hey, how should we die then? And he just says that they should die by delusion.
Mm-hmm.
They go back on the train ride.
Right. And then you see them together walking down the street, just whistling all together. And they're walking past some tourists and they like photobomb a picture they're taking. And the tourists are like, oh, let me see the picture. And they just scream as the 3 of them walk away whistling.
And we find out that they're already dead. And in fact, if you look back on the episode, they've been dead since the crane scene.
Yeah.
That they haven't had shadows.
Mm-hmm. Like after the scene where they're first like evicted from the building, that's like the first scene where you see they don't have shadows.
Yeah, and that's why they see the guy after the train, because they're dead, so they see ghosts.
Mm-hmm. But, so there's a thing in Japanese mythology where, like, when you're a ghost, you start every day, the same as the day you died. So that's why Fuyabachi still has 1 pill left in his container, which, is not something I knew till I was looking up, hey, were these guys dead on Wikipedia? So,
yeah, that's an interesting thing. I didn't know about that either. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, cool, but...
Hey, check out this cool dead people tip.
And then we get another sort of like weird sort of side story. This is episode 9, etc. And we sort of see the way that... So, like, the last one is sort of like, this is what Tokyo looks like in the wake of the Little Slugger attacks. And now we get sort of like the social effects of Little Slugger.
And this is an interesting episode, I think, because like I feel like I hadn't seen anything about Paranoia Agent before we started doing this, but I actually had seen a scene from this episode, and I think that like some really like interesting imagery actually comes from this episode, which is just sort of like, I don't know, I just think that that's interesting, which is why I said that word so many times.
Right. It's certainly an episode. Like, because
out of all the episodes, this is one of them.
It's one of them. Yeah. This episode is entirely focused around this group of middle-aged women who are gossiping over Little Slugger, and this is again another thing where sort of like we can't exactly tell where the line between fiction and reality exists, because all of these women are sort of like, they all do the same structure where it's like, have you heard this about Little Slugger? You won't tell anyone, right? Like, they're sort of like building up this whole like mystique of like gossip about this. And And so, the first one, they talk about this local boy who had this mental breakdown over failing his entrance exams over and over. And he's sort of like, he's overstudying, he's stressed. And at some point he like sneezes and a mathematical equation literally falls from his sneeze and lands on the ground.
Yeah. With like a clunk. It's disturbing. Yeah.
And so he goes to the practice exam and he's sneezing out another and another and another. Like, he seems to have gotten a cold and he's just like spewing his knowledge out very literally. And so he has like this breakdown in the bathroom where he's just like vomiting up all of these math equations as like bile.
Right, and trying to shove them back into his mouth, which is...
Yeah, it's really gross. He's like trying to eat his own vomit, basically. And while he's having this breakdown, Little Slugger gets him, and that's the whole story.
Right.
Oh, and he died also. Right, that's how they end that. But so sort of it's going around in this circular thing where each of them tells a story, and this next one's sort of about like this rude mother-in-law trying to teach her daughter-in-law etiquette, and eventually they sort of lash out at each other, and Little Slugger smacks into the old lady. It kind of just continues to go back and forth, and finally they run into the new member of their group, sort of the new wife who's in this gossip group. Mm-hmm. And she spins this sort of ridiculous story of a lady who sort of goes through in vitro fertilization because they can't have sex the normal way. Mm-hmm. Or they can't have children the normal way.
Yeah, I assume they can still have urethra.
Bad news, though, for her pregnancy. The nurses extremely fucked up and gave her someone else's egg and also not the father's sperm. Or not the husband's sperm. So the doctor, to avoid acknowledgement of the error, asks the nurses to burn the evidence, and he's like, he has to freak out every time that she shows up so that he's like, oh yeah, this is
just such a normal baby.
What a normal baby that's yours. This is extremely your baby. Look at it. There it is, your baby. And eventually the lady complains about a violent reaction from the child, like kicking, and it turns out that it's a little slugger in the womb. And it pulls out, and all the other women are just like, that's stupid. Like, that's impossible. How did that happen? And, Little Slugger already exists, so how is that real? And, so all of them are like, oh, wait, this new lady, you're the wife of a scriptwriter, right? So you must be spinning a tall tale. And they all laugh about how she isn't very good at making up stories. And it kind of continues from there where, like, it starts to get more absurd as they tell these stories, what Little Slugger can do, and like the scriptwriter's wife continues to point out like, hey, wait a minute, but your story doesn't make sense either. That doesn't have anything to do with it. And they all turn on her like, actually, it's very real. Sort of like this weird mob mentality of like, to them, it doesn't matter if it's real or not.
The new guy.
Yeah, alienate the new person. And so there's like this whole thing about the ex-boxer, like an ex-boxer who gets tempted by unhealthy food and then gets killed for no reason. Mm-hmm. There's one about like a rookie pitcher in a real baseball game where Little Slugger's at the plate. Yeah, and it was on TV. We all saw it. You didn't see it? Well, weird. And, the wife of the scriptwriter tries another story and, tells the story about a man on a deserted island who just gets slammed. Everyone calls her out on it again. And so, like, she keeps coming up with these new stories to try to fit in with this new group, but none of them work. And we get like, oh, Little Slugger works for the Yakuza, and Little Slugger kills the space team, which sounds like, Little Slugger kills the space team, and Little Slugger works for the Yakuza sounds like the weirdest sort of like children's story setup. Like just the way the titles work, like, oh, Harry Potter visits the dragon kind of thing.
It kind of almost, it's almost like later, like, horror movie sequels where they just have to get more and more ridiculous.
Right.
Little Slugger X.
Oh my god, he goes to space.
Freddy versus Little Slugger.
And so she's really down in the dumps walking home because, she wasn't able to fit in with this new group of friends. And when she gets home, she finds that her husband, the scriptwriter, has been attacked by Little Slugger and is bleeding on the floor. And instead of calling 911, which he asks for, he's constantly like, I need help. called an ambulance. She's like, tell me how this happened. I need to have a story to tell to the women in the group. And he ends up passing out as she like shakes him, trying to be like, I need the story.
Yeah, this is probably my least favorite episode of the series.
It's real plotting in a way.
Like, it just, like, I think it's good to, like, establish that, like, oh, people are really, like, talking about Little Slugger, and, like, maybe even this, like, gossip about him is making him stronger in a certain way. And there's, like, certain, like, really striking visuals, like the math, like, literally flying out of a teen's head, but it just doesn't feel like it... I don't feel like it really connects that well back to the rest of the series.
Like, I feel like there maybe should have been fewer stories, almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because, like, it starts getting, like, real long-winded. Because they start, like, there's a whole one that's just, like, a romance story that just ends with Little Slugger being there and killing them both. Like, it starts getting a little ridiculous. Like, I think they could have cut down the stories by, like, half.
Mm-hmm. Like, it starts to feel like an R.L. Stine anthology at a certain point.
Right. It's a bunch of people, like, basically pitching Goosebumps stories, but about Little Slugger.
Right. So, much more terrifying.
Right, it's the scariest. But, yeah, so then we get sort of our, I guess the final filler episode, or sort of like, you know, influence episode. This is episode 10, Mellow Moromi.
Right. But this one almost feels like a little bit of a return to form, even though it's like a series of new characters.
Yeah, and it ends up playing into the plot more than the other ones.
So it's about an anime team making the new Moromi TV show. And it starts off with like... Oh god, I didn't write down the character's name for this episode.
A lot of the people in the studio have names, and I can't keep them all on track, but the ones we want to focus on in particular are Naoyuki Saruta, who is the production manager, and the head of the whole project, Oda Nobunaga. Oops. But yeah, so it opens up in a way where you're like, I don't know what the fuck's going on, because the opening is just the first couple minutes or like the first minute of the Moromi anime.
Right, and it's like a very mellow dog like hanging out with a baseball kid like, "Hey, you should take a break."
Yeah, and as you go through it, it sort of like goes back. It's like, now it's a production cell. Now it's like storyboards and everything. And it turns out they're in a studio recording the voiceover for Mellow Moromi, the anime.
Mm-hmm. And then one thing I really like about this episode is that every time like you're introduced to a new character, Moromi actually comes in and it's like, this person does this on the anime. They make the art for the backgrounds. They mix the audio. And it's like really weird. And it's sort of like something you would see in like a kid's show where it's like, oh, here's how the sausage gets made with this TV show. It's
right, and it also gets like a little disturbing because it's like, and if this person messes up, then it goes to someone else. You know, like it starts to turn a little dark almost. Right. So we're having this anime has some production issues, and they talk about it, you know, in the studio while they're doing voiceover. Like, you know, we're not going to be able to get this done in time. You know, a lot of fresh talents on this show. It seems like, you know, overall it's kind of like a newbie sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But everyone loves Moromi,
right?
The mascot, and so they need to do this.
Perhaps the scriptwriter is dead. Oh
yeah, they show in they show that the writer gets paralyzed during the production of the show, and it's like, oh. I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure that that's the scriptwriter from episode 9 who gets attacked.
Yeah.
So interspersed in sort of like the look at the production of this anime, we also get scenes of the production manager driving on the way to deliver the episode 1 tapes to the studio.
Right.
And so it's like, so there's only 30 minutes to go before it airs, which is bad. Rough start.
Right.
And he keeps falling asleep on the road, and sort of every time his eyes close, we see a new scene from the anime production that's going
like
on
weeks ago or so.
Yeah.
Or even days ago in certain circumstances.
Right.
But
basically, or hours ago, but
he is not very good at his job because he really just keeps mucking up everybody's work, it seems like.
Yeah, I've seen people do readings of this character as sort of like a realistic depiction of sort of like the Moe clumsy character, and how this person in real life would be the most annoying nuisance in the world.
Oh my god, that's a very fun reading of this.
Because, like, he trips over, like, a computer cable for someone who's doing digital art, and it loses all the work, and...
He gets, like, a freshly painted background, and he's like, don't worry, nothing's gonna happen to this, and he folds it up and puts it in his pocket, and as he starts to ruin their lives, like, and just the stress of making this anime starts to, like, one by one pick off the people making the anime. Little Slugger gets to them.
They're all said like they're Little Slugger attacks.
Right. They're all pushed into the corner through stress.
Right. And sort of the whole thing about his is sort of like every time that he's cornered, he's like, actually, this is someone else's problem. Like, oh, it's your problem for having the cable out where I could trip over it, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And like to take out his anger, he's like attacking the keyframes and stuff for the anime. Like, he is actively sabotaging it through his clumsiness.
Right. He he knocks the power out in the building by like being just, oh my god. He's the worst. He's the worst.
Yeah, and like it cocks back to him like driving, and he's like, other people have a problem. I don't make mistakes. The people who got attacked by Little Slugger are maggots.
Mm-hmm.
And he sees Little Slugger in his rearview mirror and sort of like panics and sort of drives faster and seems to disappear.
Yeah.
But then we also see like, he misses a deadline for something and he pushes the, blames on others.
Right. And he keeps seeing Little Slugger, and he keeps like Nobunaga, his boss, is just like really just berating him, like just like letting him have it, like pulling his ears, just like calling him like a dumb monkey, I think.
Right, he falls asleep during the job and stuff. And like there's one point where, he shows up to the person who kind of like goes over all of the cuts of the anime to make sure they're okay. He's like, we need these by the end of today. And it's like, nobody told me about this, and we've been at this for months now. And so, again, he's in trouble.
Mm-hmm. He goes over to someone's house to pick up the work, and they are literally lying there dead, and he just picks up the stuff and is like, right. Oh, great work.
Yeah, and he blames his boss for not noticing that she was dead. Like, oh, it's all his fault that I couldn't tell was dead. I'm not dumb enough that I don't know someone dead. It just looked like she was sleeping. What the best part about it all, though, is that they still introduce this dead person. Like, this person is lying in a puddle of blood on their desk, and Moromi comes in and is like, this is the cleanup artist, or whatever.
So, like, eventually, through all these flashbacks, we finally get to one of the last flashbacks where, like, finally, the first episode of the Moromi is finished, and all he has to do is drive it to the station to get it filmed.
The tape is found in a dead man's hand on there. And everyone else in the team is dead except for Oda Nobunaga and Naoyuki. So like Oda grabs it and he's like, I'm gonna deliver this and we'll finally be done.
And Sayuki he bats him with the little slugger bat.
He has his own gold bat that's not bent. And just, like, slams it in the back of Oda's head, and he, like, takes his phone and is like, oh, I'll deliver it, all right, kind of thing. And so you get the idea that maybe he's the one who's been killing all these people and letting Little Slugger take the blame for it. Like, every time someone slights him in the studio, he just kills them.
Right. I actually hadn't read it that way, but you know what? That makes a lot of sense.
I wasn't sure. I really wasn't sure. And so by the end of this, Little Slugger's against him, and sort of like he's having a panic attack on the road. He's like running into the wall on this road as he drives there. And we see him sort of like, he thinks he's driven away from Little Slugger, but Little Slugger's in the back seat and just smacks him.
Right. And that we see the people at the station, like, about to broadcast the show, and they run outside. There's a terrible car wreck, and they just grab the videotape from his
there's a car wreck,
hands.
and the production manager is lying there dead on the steps, and the anime is in his hands, and they just take it from, like, oh, thank God the tape's okay. We gotta get the Moromi show out.
So yeah, this episode feels like a pretty scathing critique of the anime industry.
Maybe just a bit. And so, like, it comes back to sort of the take a rest thing coming from Moromi in the anime that they're making. And I guess the production manager was finally able to just relax and take a rest. Take a rest. Take a rest.
Do you think the director... I forgot his name.
Oda Nobunaga.
No. Like, of the actual anime.
Oh, it's Satoshi Kon.
Satoshi Kon. Do you think he was told, oh no, you have to have 13 episodes, not 12? And he was like, oh, I hate this anime industry. I'll give you a 13th episode.
I'll kill you in the anime. I do wonder if any of them are based on, like, real people he knew. But anyways, that's a wild sort of meta episode that kind of shows how desperate everyone is for Moromi content. Like Moromi's just the super chill sort of, like, it's almost like a parody or sort of a play on the relaxing character sort of trope in Japanese culture. I think it's Iyashi Kiara, like Tare Panda or one of those, where it's sort of like it's a character who just sort of like lays around and doesn't have any problems.
Like that the hippo thing?
What you might be thinking of the same thing. But yeah, so it's sort of like based on that, and it seems like everyone really needs Moromi content right now with Little Slugger up in his kill game.
Right. I mean, even before that, Moromi was still very popular.
Right, but it seems like it's almost a fervor now.
Yeah.
And then we end up in episode 11. No entry. And this is sort of where the lines blur even further in what the show considers reality versus fiction. And we open up on this older woman who is turning down a life-saving operation at a hospital and picking up some meds. And it turns out that this woman is Keiichi's wife. And so she's going through her issues, and meanwhile we sort of see everyone else. It kind of, you know, she's walking through the city, and we see Tsukiko on the TV getting interviewed about the Moromi anime. Mm-hmm. And Tsukiko doesn't seem really enthused, but hopes that it inspires peace. You know, kind of very, like, almost, like, marketed towards this interview. Like, I don't really care, but these are the things I should say.
Right.
They talk about how Moromi is based on Tsukiko's childhood dog and stuff like that, and they're going through old sketches. And it seems like Little Slugger rumors are continuing to spread. She kind of passes by some women talking about it, and, like, it looks like he's, like, kind of a big buff man now.
Yeah. He is large and in charge of this entire city. He is no longer little.
Right, they decide he's huge and has big muscles. Like, he's, like, 8 feet tall now. And he's just like, ugh, he's meaty.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the woman walks in and walks into her house. And Little Slugger is there. And she talks about having called Little Slugger to her house because she had thought of dying, and sort of like she felt like she had nothing she could do, and realized her mistake just in time to not get attacked by Little Slugger. because she couldn't dare betray her husband. And this is where we learn that this is Keiichi's wife, Misai. And so Misai starts to sort of talk to Little Slugger about sort of Keiichi's life. Keiichi is now working several jobs with a construction company as like a security guard. And so he's running between these 3 different jobs at the same time as this conversation goes. And Misai talks about how Little Slugger's sense of salvation is flawed and kind of invites him in to talk about this whole thing. And she talks about how she was born with a weak constitution and that just throughout her whole life she's told that she wouldn't live long and she didn't feel comfortable making any permanent state in life, like, you know, getting married or anything, but she found Keiichi, and Keiichi loved her for who she was and didn't need any changes, and it totally changed the way she looked at life. Unfortunately, at the same time, while she's talking about this, it skips back to Keiichi on the job as he sort of like kind of ogles the butt of a woman walking by.
Hey, nobody's perfect.
Right. It's like, that doesn't happen throughout the rest of the episode, but that particular sort of like juxtaposition is kind of funny. Because he's just got a really good expression on his face, too.
Yeah, it's very good. And Keiichi's actually working with somebody he knows at the construction site.
Keiichi ends up meeting, I don't remember if he's given a name, but just like another person that he had originally caught, like a thief. So Misai kind of talks about how, she's constantly been sort of a burden, or felt like a burden to her husband, because she can't have children due to her weak constitution. And, you know, even though he continues to accept her after all of this, she still feels kind of like she continues to curse herself for it. You know, he's working long hours now to be able to support both of them. And she had always worried that he was using work to avoid her and, you know, that she's a burden. And as this happens, Little Slugger keeps growing bigger and bigger. Sort of like under the influence of sort of this self-loathing that Misai has.
Her doubt and self-loathing like gives power to Little Slugger.
Right. So Keiichi is again continuing to run through, and Inukai is the name of the man who he captured. And so they almost have like a weird camaraderie.
Right. They miss the way things used to be, like between the cops and the robbers.
They're talking about how it was old, you know, kind of old-fashioned detectives and old-fashioned thieves.
With a burlap sack.
Right. Inukai talks about how he's too old school to become a thief now that, you know, like, lockpicking and everything has changed. And Keiichi's like, I'm kind of an old school detective, too. I don't know if I fit on the force. But meanwhile, Misai continues to talk about her work as a wife, and how even though she can't do so much, she always does her best to make her husband happy after, you know, his hard days at work. And like Lil Slugger keeps having these ups and downs where he gets really excited and almost ready to attack Keiichi's wife when she says something condescending. And as soon as she changes it to something positive, he like flips out and he starts just smashing shit through her house.
And it'll just like start like practice batting right above her head.
Right, and like just smashing her paper doors and her TV and her table. It's awful. She needs that stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, Keiichi and Inukai are kind of getting along as they talk, and they go out drinking together for a bit after work. And so they, you know, Keiichi talks about how Little Slugger is sort of an insult to Keiichi's belief in sort of a motive and sort of, you know, these other ideals that he has. And this is where he decides, maybe I don't belong on the police force. And meanwhile, Little Slugger's ready to again attack Misai, but she just fucking laughs in his face and points out how, despite everything, they've moved forward, and, you know, Keiichi's always stood as this sort of like this pillar in her life who's always been like, you know, no matter what happens, we can always move forward, we can always do something, and, you know, we'll take care of it together. So she notes that, you know, she'll never again wish for death, and she'll go back for the operation knowing that, you know, she wants to stand by this man. She points out that humans are stronger than he thinks. They're able to face reality, and that sort of like Little Slugger, all he's doing is sort of, you know, putting a Band-Aid on something. He's not ultimately fixing the problem. and even goes as far to say that he and Moromi are the same sort of thing where all they can do is give temporary relief to people, whereas in the long term, it ultimately means nothing. And Keiichi notices, while he's talking to Inukai, how good his wife is to him. And I think at some point he almost says like, oh, she's almost too good to me. And he notes that he's sort of like given up on the dream of being a cool old-timey cop because, he's missed his chance. He's clearly like, he's in a position where like, he just doesn't fit in. Like, I think a part of like,
crime doesn't work the way he wants it to anymore.
Right. He just wants to catch, he kind of wants it to be like the good old days where you'd catch a robber and stuff. But, I think part of Maniwa's sort of like understanding of Makoto that he didn't have shows how like out of touch he is or how he feels with being a cop. But then Inukai points out that there's still plenty for Keiichi to do, or he thinks so. And he opens the door of the bar, and outside in the town, it's sort of like, it reverts, it's a different art style, and it sort of reverts to sort of like early post-war Japan, like his childhood.
Yeah, like 50s or so.
Yeah, 50s, 60s, somewhere around there. And in this world, there are old-timey burglars that he can chase and become a hero, and he can do all the things he wanted to do when he grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And we cut back to Keiichi's wife, and she's sort of like, sitting in her house waiting for her husband to come home. She doesn't know where he is. And Maniwa appears in sort of like this weird getup, sort of like a hoodie and like these ridiculous like computer glasses he's built.
Mm-hmm. He's got like radios strapped to himself.
Yeah, and he goes to talk to Misai, and Misai's like, he's not home. He's not coming home. And, Maniwa gets shocked and prepares to go look for Keiichi.
All right. So my notes for episode 12 start with Woofa Doofa. This is a weird one.
Oh, it sure is. It opens like with a real striking shot.
Yeah. This episode is episode 12, Radar Man.
Radar Man.
We got there. So yeah, Maniwa is like on top of a building doing his best Batman the Animated Series impression.
Right. So this episode opens up with like Maniwa's sort of like things about, it's more information about Lil Slugger. He's got like paranoia, it's his lifeblood, and like the strength that he has is the fear that other people have of him. And it's like going down the street, and then it pans to Maniwa having a fucking sword fight with Little Slugger. Well, Big Little Slugger.
Right.
And it's just all sort of disgusting, like really disgusting, like monster faces coming out of Little Slugger. Like he's become less human. And through this like really kind of well done sort of like jumping around sword fight, we see like his Mitsuhiro's sword turns into an umbrella, so like there's that blending of what's real and what's not, but he's taking real damage from Lil Slugger's attacks.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately Lil Slugger runs away and he realizes he's not strong enough, so he goes to meet the old man, sort of holy warrior style. Like he's gotten fully into this old man as the sage.
Right. He has taken Makoto's role in some senses. But yeah, he talks to the old man, and the old man actually dies, and, wait, what does the old man say? Like,
dance with the bunny.
Dance with the bunny. Oh, right. So...
Which leads into...
Dance with the bunny, almost a very literal metaphor, because, he's watching, like, the interview with, Sagi on the TV, and like when she's showing her old like pictures, like her old drawings of Hiromi, he notices something.
First of all, there's like a little picture of something that looks like Lil Slugger in her notes as well.
Yeah, he notices like a little slugger. So and then he meets a tiny anime babe with bunny ears.
Girl spirit thing.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, oh, Dance with the Bunny must be this bunny girl I'm seeing in the reflections of the mirror, these windows.
I mean, like, honestly, I don't think he would have needed to be told to dance with the bunny to see what was going on with that.
Yeah, and so let's talk about him for a bit. He's way lame when it comes to actually the reality. Like, he looks like he does from the recap episode when he's in the fantasy world. But in reality, he's just like in this really ratty hoodie, and his glasses just pick up radio signals.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he has a button on them and they spin real stupid and they pick up radio signal.
Like, it is clear that he has not been taking care of himself. He probably has been living on the street for weeks at this point. But yeah, so he follows the bunny and he's led to the otaku's house.
Right, from the Harumi episode.
Right. He's made a couple of appearances aside from that, but mostly you know him from that. And like all of these anime figures are just talking to him.
Are just alive.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
And something weird is that they refer to him as a stupid doll, but
right,
they're all otaku. Literally figures.
Right. They refer to the otaku as a stupid doll.
Right. And also you see the otaku is making figures of all of the victims.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, the anime figures are here to help solve the case.
Right. They're on the case. They help Manawa track down Sagi's old home.
Because they find that they hack into the police together, and they find that there was an attack similar to Little Sluggers 10 years ago,
right,
where Tsukiko Sagi was the victim, and the assailant was never found.
Right. So he goes up to where she grew up, and he's like talking to her father. And as a kid, Sagi had a puppy named Marumi.
Mm-hmm.
And one day, Little Slugger attacked her, and she lost control of Marumi, and Marumi ran into traffic.
No. Little Slugger attacked the dog. That's the story we're going with.
Okay. Little Slugger attacked the dog.
And he talks about how sort of like he knows that that's not the truth, but he's stayed quiet about it because sort of
he felt bad. He felt like he had pressured her so much that he felt bad that she had to lie to him. She was so scared of him.
Right. He talks about sort of like how he was too strict and, you know, had too much discipline for her, and how, you know, not having like a mother figure in her life may have affected how he ultimately treated Tsukiko. And so, yeah, Tsukiko was so scared to tell him whatever the truth is that he just went along with the story and kind of like helped to, you know, tried to help to find the little slugger at that time, like playing into her delusion just so that, you know, this was the one time that sort of like he was willing to you know, look the other way because he felt like it was ultimately his own fault. Then at the same time, we see Tsukiko herself being pressured again, like she's been out of the hospital long enough and everyone is waiting for her to make her new character.
Right, like her boss is getting like visibly like very frustrated, like he gives her a ride home and then just berates her for not like coming up with like a new idea.
Right, like kind of attacks her in the car.
Mm-hmm.
And he refers to her as a moon that is barely afloat thanks to the sun that is Maromi. Sort of treating it like this, you know, huge deal, and how he's just sick of dealing with her personal needs and that she needs to give results because it's a job, and kind of like pulls back. It's like, oh my god, just too much pressure, you know? Ha ha ha. Forget I said anything. Bye. And he drives off the screen and immediately gets killed by Little Slugger.
Yep, it's
like, it's such a hard turn. Like, Little Slugger smashes his car and kills him, and just shows up as Big Boy Slugger.
Mm-hmm.
He's way too big.
Like, then it's at like the funeral for him, and everybody's talking shit about Sagi, like sort of like blaming her
Right, it's like, oh, Tsukiko should have known that he was cornered and that little slugger would come after him. He was murdered because Tsukiko Sagi can't tell that fucking, this guy was cornered and he just kept pushing him.
But yeah.
Anyways, it doesn't matter because Moromi's here to take care of her. Don't listen to those people. They don't get it. Then we have a moment where Maniwa calls Tsukiko at work.
And, And Moromi, actually, cuts the line.
Right, Maniwa claims to have solved the mystery.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, your father says you don't have to suffer alone anymore, you can be honest, and then Moromi literally cuts the line.
With scissors.
Right, with scissors, and is like, no, you can't do that. Now that your memories are coming back, you're gonna be cornered. And Lil Slugger bursts through into the office. And then, as they're running to get away from Lil Slugger, Maniwa appears to fight Lil Slugger using the original bat that Tsukiko claimed was the bat that killed
Moromi the dog.
Moromi the real dog.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this huge fight. It seems like Lil Slugger is sort of scared of this original bat for some reason, but no matter how much he gets attacked, he's regenerating.
And that's when Sagi escapes into the same world that Chief Ikari is.
Right, Keiichi finds himself in, his school, reliving memories of, girls gossiping about him and how cool he is, but when he tries to go into the room, Tsukiko pops out, and the worlds sort of connect there.
Mm-hmm. And then, all the merchandise for Moromi disappears. It's just, shots of, the world, and, just... Moromis are just missing from where they all used to be. Right, there are posters up that just have a Moromi-shaped disappearance on them. Mm-hmm.
And Moromi sort of talks about disappearing from the world to protect Tsukiko.
Mm-hmm. And Ikari's wife is in the hospital.
Right, she's taken to the hospital and she finds herself on an elevator with the old man, the one who had died on her.
Oh,
and she just asks to go to her husband. But more than anything else is that this black flood that starts.
Oh, right. How could I forget?
How could you have forgotten? Well, because it plays more into next episode, but you see, they zoom out and everyone is suddenly affected by Little Slugger and it feels in trouble because Moromi's not there. And this black flood engulfs Tokyo. Oh. But that leads directly into episode 13. The final episode, which is the title.
Oh, Jeepers Creepers. I'm so glad you're taking this one.
My one-line note is just, what the fuck? So, Moromi, Tsukiko, and Keiichi are hanging out in the old town, and Moromi talks about how Keiichi's town is where he can be his happiest, and he can also be himself. He can just be who he wants to be. And it's interesting because they're talking to townspeople and they're just saying straight up things like, oh, Little Slugger won't come here, don't worry. Sort of this disconnect between, I guess, the real world and this false world that has been created.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, in the real world, Moromi fever is too strong. Everyone needs a Moromi. Moromi has disappeared and people need him. So this black ooze or something starts engulfing the world. You see different characters, the otaku appears, and after he's finished making all of his figures, he goes outside and is suddenly just engulfed in this flood of black ooze, and people standing at the toy stores to get their Moromis are taken.
Yeah. You can't escape the ooze.
And there's a great part where the mafia guy from before, or the Yakuza guy from before, is watching the TV, and he's watching the news, and the newscaster gets swallowed by the black ooze, and it cuts to static, and he gets closer to the TV to figure out what's going on, and the black ooze shoots through the TV and engulfs him. It seems like it's feeding on the fear made by Moromi's disappearance.
Mm-hmm.
Then back in the fake world, we find that everyone is treating Tsukiko as Keiichi's daughter.
Right.
And, Keiichi notes that just sort of ultimately, I don't think anything really matters. And, Maniwa gets through into the world using his sick radio glasses and kind of tries to explain the situation. about how the people depended on Moromi as sort of like this emotional crutch because of the little slugger situation happening at the same time. And now that she's disappeared from the world, the paranoia can only grow and sort of like consume the people of Tokyo like wholly.
Right. It's almost as if Little Slugger is an agent of
Whoa!
Scary stuff. I lost it.
And he says that Tsukiko is needed to stop Little Slugger. And as he's trying to explain all this, Keiichi just fucking throws a rock into the TV playing it. And he's kind of happy to live in his delusion.
Right, and all the people around him start applauding.
Yeah, they're like, "Oh, he got rid of the great evil message." And he suddenly has like a cop uniform on, just like everyone's praising him. But he turns and he sees that his wife has appeared in his fantasy world. And he sort of like panics. He's like, "Wait, she shouldn't be here." Because at some point he's just like decided this is just his world. And he sort of continues to see his wife, like how they first met. Like they go to a bar and he finds her like serving them. And Moromi sort of fighting back against the wife for invading this private space.
Right, like Moromi actually actively deletes the bar from the world once they leave it.
Right, and so Tsukiko and Keiichi run, and they find themselves at a festival. And, Keiichi turns one way and then looks back at Tsukiko, and Tsukiko has regressed to the age of a very young girl and has the original Moromi the dog with her as well. And so it turns out that, because this world is his dream, sort of everything he wanted comes true. He wanted to have a daughter with his wife because he hated his dad and didn't want a son in case he ended up having a son that also hated him.
I mean, it's good logic.
Which is, it's a way to look at it, but it's sort of like his wife appears again and sort of like he's kind of forced to have these flashbacks of the way that, he with his life in the real world kind of went with as it relates to his wife, sort of all these moments that they've had together and all these ways that they've sort of pushed back against all of these troubles that they've faced. And ultimately she passes away because she was dying and the surgery she was going through couldn't save her in time. So she dies and disappears from the world, and Keiichi kind of realizes something and remembers sort of the words that he gave to his wife that gave her the strength to move forward. And ultimately he moves forward too. And a kind of a great moment where he picks up a bat and like a rock and he literally smashes the world by taking a baseball bat to it.
Yeah, it's great. And it's like the way he swings it even like mimics the Little Slugger, which is there's a really good cut where he does the Little Slugger hit. And, Moromi's like, "But this is your place, this is your world." And he sort of says something like, "My place disappeared from this world a long time ago. The reality is that there is no place for me anymore, but that's the reality I have to face." It's like real cool. Mm-hmm.
But when he comes through, he's like walking out of a subway station. Tsukiko ends up getting cornered by him and Maniwa. And we learn the truth of the whole situation. Tsukiko invented Little Slugger 10 years ago to sort of explain how her dog died, because what ended up actually happening is she had a menstrual cramp.
Oh.
That's why she grabs her stomach and, gets sick.
Oh. I don't know about lady stuff, sorry.
Fair enough. And so she kind of lets go of the dog, and the dog ends up running into the street and getting run over. And so, technically it's of her negligence, so she's scared of her father. And she invents this person that, attacked the dog. And because she suddenly had this pressure again, she had this idea to reinvent Little Slugger as someone who attacked her. And, and it's continued to build this whole thing up. And, her father just wants her to be honest with him at this point and tell the truth. And it's it's kind of heartwarming in a way, because it's like, you know, he did this because he loves her so much that he didn't want to continue to be this sort of like source of fear for her.
Mm-hmm. Like he actively goes with like this thing that he knows is a lie just because he doesn't want her to feel like she should be scared of him or anything like that.
And it ends up being that the little slugger ooze appears again and just like devours Maniwa.
Mm-hmm.
And then Moromi kind of like sucks up all of the other smaller Moromis and creates this barrier versus the ooze so that Tsukiko and Keiichi can run away. Tsukiko gets swallowed up trying to save what looks like the real Moromi dog, and Keiichi gets sucked up as well. Ultimately, Tsukiko is reliving the memory of when Moromi died, and when she sees her old self claim no responsibility, she cries and apologizes to Moromi for the mistake she made. At which point, little Slugger disappears from the world. Like, she's finally come to terms and accepted the fact that she made this problem and she has to clean it up by being honest.
It's her responsibility.
Right. So we skip 2 years later, and it looks like Tokyo is back to normal after a rebuilding effort.
Mm-hmm.
The same scroll from episode 1 plays of everyone denying each other, but or everyone denying responsibility, but it's changed. They're all sort of talking about, you know, they're actually trying to deal with their problems. And also, it seems like all of the comments are sort of subtle denials of Moromi as an entity, because they just refer to like, oh, the pink thing, or, you know, oh, no, I didn't want a dog, I wanted a cat, or things like that.
Oh, okay.
But then it also turns out there's a new cat mascot, Fmeow, who's getting big.
It's a good name.
Tsukiko has become an office worker. Keiichi's still working as a guard. And we kind of see we see Kawazu again, still working as a journalist, but he seems less
skeevy.
Yeah. We see Mitsuhiro, Maniwa, who's just gone completely white in his hair and has sort of become the new sage.
Right. He's the new old man writing math equations on the ground in the parking lot of the hospital. And
at the very end, he comes to a startled surprise. And in the final scene, he sort of makes a claim that no mystery stays unsolved forever, and that sort of it's all one reoccurring dream. And it sort of it tells you like, hey, maybe now go and watch the old episodes again and see if you can find hidden clues in the mysteries.
Right. You got the bad ending. You got to do it again on hard mode.
Right. And make sure to grab the goddess bracelet this time. But yeah, that was really long, but it just feels, because everything is important in this series, it feels like.
Yeah.
Every detail is like crafted to be part of the story, which is kind of fascinating in a way.
Yeah, there's not a lot of fat to be cut from this.
Yeah. Like, you could maybe cut the 3 episodes in the middle that are sort of about sort of like a Little Slugger's development as a social construct, but I think that it plays into the conclusion more so, especially after you watch the full series.
Yeah. This series was kind of like stressful for me. Like I really enjoyed like the first like 7 or so episodes. I was like way into it, and then like by the end it's just like it's so impossible to take like this series like at face value. Like you really have to be like, okay, what are the metaphors? What am I taking from this? What is the series about to me?
Right, because you get this idea suddenly that like you know, the fiction and the reality of the story blends so much at the end that there isn't like a metaphor. It becomes real just because of the way that this social phenomenon has exploded. It's nuts.
Yeah.
But I think it's good for that. I think it's a good series.
It is quality anime. But like I meant to watch this series twice before doing this, but like after watching it once, I was just like, it just wiped me out. I just couldn't, like, it tells you to go back, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was just so tired. I was like, oh, that's good. And I can't do it again.
Right. But there are things that you just kind of grab, like having recognized the change, you go, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, there are small things that you recognize and you remember, and it's like, oh, okay, this makes more sense now, or this, like, I can put together the pieces.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so let's talk about it. There are a lot of bigger themes in this story that we can go into. Mm-hmm. And I guess the first one we can hit is sort of the central theme. It's about avoiding responsibility and looking for shortcuts. And we sort of see that in each of these stories in a different way. Like, the ultimate thing is Tsukiko avoiding responsibility, not only in having to admit that, she accidentally got her dog killed, but also then that, she can't come up with a new character in time.
Right. And, I mean, with Ichi, there could be, like, something where it's like, oh, wow, he's unpopular because, yeah, he looks like a little slugger. But maybe it's just his personality,
Yeah, he's kind of a dickbag.
Yeah.
He constantly tries to, like, avoid the actual issue, which is he looks like a little slugger, and puts all of his blame on Ushiyama.
Mm-hmm.
Because Ushiyama's causing these issues. He's the one who's creating these lies, the slander about me. And you see it in, you see it a bit in, like, the Harumi episode, where Harumi and Maria, Harumi, if she is the dominant, the dominant personality, is trying to, like, avoiding actually having to deal with Maria, and it's just like, oh, well, I'm getting married now, time to throw out all that stuff and throw that part of my life away, without actually trying to deal with the fact that she is housing two personalities in her body.
And she doesn't even acknowledge it with her husband.
Right, like, it just clearly wants to try to take it on herself and doesn't want to have anyone know that she has problems. Then we see it with Masami, who, because of this, this issue that he's made with the mafia, instead of dealing with it, by kind of losing the things that he cares about, like, his house, more than anything else. Instead of giving away his house, he's looking for this shortcut, and he's like, oh, well, I'll just steal 2 million yen.
Right, I'll just rob.
Right, and as it becomes a bigger and bigger cost, it's one of those things where, like, well, shit, where do we go from here? I can only go forward, because suddenly he's lost control. His looking for shortcuts ended up with him in a worse place constantly, until ultimately he's attacked, I guess.
I mean, even things with, like, episode 9, with, like, the women gossiping, like, the lady can't just, like, make up a story. She has to actually get it from her husband, who might, like, has been attacked by Little Slugger.
Right, and, like, everyone else is sort of, like, making up these stories, but the way that they tell the stories is, like, kind of attacking her. It's like, oh, well, your story's dumb compared to ours, so, she's looking for a way to come up with new ideas, and her new idea is, my husband got attacked. Yeah, it's such a big part of it, and it comes to a head with, like, when they talk about how, Little Slugger's only a temporary relief, and it's, kind of the same as Moromi. This concept comes together as everyone looking to avoid the actual issues they're handling. The guy who can't admit that he's fucking up this anime production and keeps taking it out on people, possibly killing them. Not sure.
Right. That's just a fan theory.
Everyone else, everyone else is the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that in sort of the opening bit, with just everyone else blaming other people for their problems, or trying to kind of, like, skirt their way out of work. It's it's a huge thing, and ultimately all of these things pile up into, the little slugger at the end. Like, everyone has sort of put their reliance on little slugger as a crutch. Oh, little slugger caused this. Oh, it caused this. Oh, we're all in trouble because of little slugger,
Right.
Like, it becomes an epidemic.
Yeah, it's overtaken the town.
Right, everyone has this big excuse now that's all caused because Tsukiko couldn't admit that she's just having trouble with a character,
Mm-hmm.
Like, her desire to escape is so strong that she ends up building this fake story around an assailant that everyone sort of sees it now as a viable, like, way of getting out of stuff. Like, this goes a bit into some of the other things, but, like, how many of those attacks are real up to the point where Little Slugger starts killing people? Where does the paranoia start to get so much?
I mean, like, even once Little Slugger starts killing people, I mean, the first victim is a kid who is actively on the suicide forums. Like,
right.
Maybe he just was gonna...
Maybe he offed himself. Yeah, because, I mean, while the metaphor eventually becomes reality, and we have this point where, like, the physical manifestation of this avoidance comes to life and starts killing people, there are a number of attacks and deaths that can be directed towards other characters. Like, it just, like, doing it themselves. So, like, did Ichi attack himself to avoid conflict? We don't know.
Did he attack... Or, well, actually, I was gonna say,
did
he
he
attack
Uchiyama,
Ushi? Yeah. Like, I feel like it's... Like, I want to say that there was never a Little Slugger and that there's no Little Slugger, but the only, like, problem I'm having with that is, like...
The ending?
No. It was actually who attacked Kawazu, even, in the first episode.
Yeah, Kawazu's the only one that really doesn't fit that, unless you consider him looking for shortcuts as sort of, like, stalking a woman to try to, figure that out. But that might have been, that could have been Tsukiko.
Yeah, that's honestly what I was thinking, but, like, wouldn't he have seen her, or...
Like, there is no real explanation for that, so it might be Tsukiko that attacked him. The thing about that is just how open-ended suddenly everything becomes when you make the realization that, once we get to the ending, and there is no Little Slugger, there's only sort of this culture of blaming others for our own problems.
Mm-hmm. I feel like by, like, the end of it, I was pretty... Like, by the end of it, the first time I watched it, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. How did they rebuild Tokyo in 2 years? But, like, whenever I came back to it, like, I gave it some time to digest, I was like, oh, okay, this didn't even happen. Like, this is just, like, Sagi, like, coming to grips with it and admitting it and quitting her job as an artist.
Or
and
being
just
fired or whatever.
Or, yeah. And just, like, the world wasn't engulfed in goo, like, literally. Well, I mean... But...
It probably wasn't?
Right.
Like, that's a further metaphor. But, yeah. That comes to another point that I wanted to bring up, which is just, like, what actually happened, what's real and what's not, and is that important? Like, is the distinction between reality and fiction in this story important, or do the themes still come across regardless of whether or not you go, like, Little Slugger is a real entity, or Little Slugger is the scapegoat that the entire world uses, or the entirety of Tokyo uses to explain these phenomena, these situations that people want to get out of.
Right.
Because the Holy Warrior episode, when we learn that Makoto's doing it, it doesn't matter that whether or not it's actually happened. He's got the idea that this little kid's going around, whacking kneecaps, and he just thinks that's cool. It's something sensational. That's what he wants, before he dies.
Like, he's doing it though. Like, he's actually going out.
Right. He's the one person doing it.
Right.
But you get the idea that any of the other attacks may have been self-inflicted.
Mm-hmm.
And, some crazy stuff was happening through that tsunami. Taeko could have just, either accidentally or intentionally hit herself and, kind of taken some memory loss or faked memory loss.
With Kawase again, do you ever, see him, with bandages or anything? Does he have any, physical...
I don't ever think you see him, it damaged. I don't think you see him attacked.
So, what I was thinking is that maybe he just faked it so that he was,
Oh, that he was part of the thing? He was, he was part of the attention?
Yeah, he wanted to, well, if I fake it, then I can write the story.
Right, here's my first-hand experience. Plus, that gets me out of having to pay the old man the money for his hospital fees.
Right. And that's another, that was, basically his... I feel like that's what you see him trying to, he's making excuses, oh, I can't pay this, here, have some flowers instead.
Right. And we see sort of the fighting back against that culture in episode 11 with Misai, sort of talking about how Little Slugger is just a temporary relief. Maybe she thinks herself, oh, I could get attacked myself or I could commit suicide and it would be blamed on Little Slugger, but she realizes that that's not a proper solution. That's just a way to get out of having to deal with her problems.
Yeah. I don't think I really like Misai, though, because she's oh, I was being the perfect wife. I was, I was cleaning, I was doing dishes, I was cooking food, and it's oh, okay, I guess that's what the perfect wife is.
Well, that's,
okay.
To her.
Yeah.
Because, yeah. I think that's a different situation in some ways because she can't kind of do anything else. The way she talks about her weak constitution, it seems like she should have died, 20 years ago. That she's dealing with so much pain. When we see the flashback or something in that fake world, she's doing her job as a waitress and literally, partway through just curls up and starts having violent pains and reactions in the middle of a restaurant.
Right, that is true.
So, I think she's just doing what she can.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think at one point, Keiichi talks about how one time he didn't come home for 9 days because of his work. And he came home to his wife sleeping on the table with 9 meals left out for dinner, for whenever he came home.
Right.
It's just her way of showing how much she appreciates him, given her situation.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I don't think it's something further Satoshi Kon is a sexist.
Oh, yeah.
Because he does have a bigger focus on sort of female characters and sort of how they're seen in society with his other movies, as far as I'm aware.
Right. I don't think I was going for that. I just didn't think I really liked.
That's fair. No, I get
part
that.
of it.
Sure.
Look, I'm just trying to find chinks in this armor because guess what, guys? It's the perfect anime.
We did best. It. Wow.
Wow, you don't have to do Choco Disaster anymore. You found it.
It's true. We did it. But yeah, I don't think ultimately it is important where we make the distinction. The distinction is cool, and when you go back and you see oh, how are all of these connected to sort of the self-inflicted violence sort of thing going on, How are these all connected in a way that everyone's just finding an excuse? But I don't think it's ultimately important. If you just do a surface read of it through the 13 episodes, I think you still get sort of the same feeling out of it if you don't get the same, we get the same meaning out of it even if you don't get the same experience out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Then another thing that comes up often in this episode is sort of the way that rumors are spread and the influence they have. Because they talk about how Little Slugger's power is directly related to the paranoia and fear of him. So, the more powerful he becomes as this figure, the more people are scared of him, the more people look for these crutches, the more people use him as an excuse. And we sort of have this different look between how the media does it, how it develops word of mouth and sort of like the sensationalism behind all of that. Because it's talked about a number of times in different media, but like the way that the news talks about stuff, they focus on sort of these negative stories, these like horrid characters, because that sensationalism is what gets views. That's what hits. And so the media constantly talks about Little Slugger. It's this big phenomenon, and they're constantly reporting on it, every attack, everything, you know? Mm-hmm. Even as like, oh, we captured him. Oh, we didn't capture him. Oh, he's found dead. We get sort of this full look through this story through them, and the way that they develop on it, and the way that becomes word of mouth, because throughout the entire series, you see these mothers and women gossiping about, oh, do you think your child, like, it starts out simple, like, oh, do you think your child's a Little Slugger? Oh,
right.
I can't believe a child would do something like this, and then it starts to build up. You know, we get to etc., and they're talking about, oh, he showed up at a baseball game and just, you know, whacked the shit out of this pitcher, or, you know, like, oh, did you hear that this kid died because Little Slugger attacked him while he's having a panic attack over entrance exams?
Right, this boxer didn't want to eat all this food, but Little Slugger murdered him.
Right, after he ate the food, for some reason, whatever. And, like, so we see the way that develops, because it's, and ultimately it comes to, like, oh, well, suddenly I heard Little Slugger's a big beefcake. You know, he's got big old muscles, and he's 10 feet tall, and, you know,
right.
He ate split a bull in half or whatever. They start making up these ridiculous things just because the hype around him has gotten so big that they just need new things to talk about, because it just keeps happening.
Mm-hmm. Like, as the rumors grow, he grows more powerful, and that just, like, it's a constant cycle. It feeds itself with people wanting to spread more.
Right, they want stories to tell, like, you know, I think it's sort of like a trope, as it were, that sort of like, you know, the gossipy kind of like mothers, but like, that plays into this whole thing, like, they're constantly shown, like, because it's related to kids and stuff. You know, and, you know, the media sensationalizes it as like, oh, you know, the delinquents these days with the recession in our economy are causing these problems. Oh, it's video games. You know, they're playing into sort of these different tropes and things that justify why it's happening without actually trying to deal with it. Again, coming back to the avoiding responsibility, it's like, oh, well, video games are the problem. We should do something. And they don't do anything. Or, oh, it's the recession in the economy. But, you know, what can you do about that? Like,
right.
It's blaming these concepts that are kind of unknowable in a way just to justify these attacks. And ultimately it just builds and builds into this huge force.
Right. Just making excuses for the excuses at a certain point.
Right. And so I think that's a big thing about it too, is just the way that information sort of spreads.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we have like Moromi. Oh, Moromi's the cute dog that everyone's so excited about. And then it's like, oh, well, Moromi is a peaceful character. We all got to turn to Moromi in times of trouble. And, you know, they build this whole anime about that, Mellow Moromi, where it's just like, you know, this guy's like, oh, I can't play baseball. And Moromi's just like, take a rest. Don't worry about it. Problems? Not problems. So it's it's sort of this weird experience with that. You know, it's the way that sort of like culture almost spreads based around these things.
Right.
So, one other thing I noticed is the way that, like, death constantly changes the experience of this anime, and always in a very literal way. Like, the entire plot of this is spurred on by the death of Moromi the dog.
Right.
And the way that Tsukiko handles that problem of having, in a moment of pain, like, let loose the dog and the dog died. Like, you know, she comes up with this huge elaborate lie of an attacker that came after her and killed the dog, and that then, because she is forgiven for that transgression, and if they pretend like that's real, it suddenly expands into, well, I got away with this once, I can get away with it again.
Right. she can use the same excuse a second time.
Right, 10 years separated so that hopefully people don't remember.
Well, I mean, it's even in a different town.
Yeah. And you see then when Little Slugger turns violent and the first death happens.
Right.
You know, we have
Makoto.
We have Makoto's death. Like that springs forward this huge chain of events. Like suddenly Little Slugger's violent. Suddenly he's killing people. You know, people are dying, and you know everyone loses their job over it because they weren't able to prevent this death. And it sets forward the way their lives spread in so many different ways because Maniwa turns into a nut job. And Keiichi, you know, has to go to a security guard. He has to run multiple jobs to support his family.
Right.
And, you know, that's the spread where suddenly, like, you know, Little Slugger gets so big they have to start, you know, mass-producing Moromi content.
To just keep people calm and just put a Band-Aid over the situation.
Yeah, and so, you know, the death just keeps spiraling and spiraling, and more deaths happen. Like, you know, Little Slugger kills a bunch of people at that outdoor bath.
Right.
He, maybe Little Slugger, but also maybe Naoyuki kills the entire anime production crew.
So, do you think, like, it was actually a Little Slugger at the outdoor bath? Because, like, he does have, like, that very emotional response to seeing, like, these three ghosts.
It might not have been Makoto, but it might have been them seeing
it could have been like a copycat.
Another copycat or something. Because they do see him, and he's... I mean, if he can see ghosts, he's freaked out. Like, it's possible. But I honestly believe that all the anime staff are... Well, except for the writer. Or not the writer, the one he finds dead.
Right.
May have all been killed by him, just out of frustration for his job. Because he shows how violent he is when he's, like, attacking he's attacking that box of keyframes or whatever, and then knocks the power out with a bat. Like, he clearly knows what to do with that
and
thing.
Also, how violent he is when he literally murders Nobunaga.
Right, we know at least that he completely murdered Nobunaga, which is a funny little thing because the real Oda Nobunaga was also taken down by a subordinate who betrayed him. So, you know, that plays in. It's
just a little inside joke for you Japanese people.
Yep. And so it's like, yeah, it's just a situation where, you know, these can all be developed, and like the first murder becomes like an impetus for more murders. And the way that like Misai's death ends up being able to save Keiichi from his own sort of like self-induced sort of like, you know, happy place, or, you know, his escape from the world. It takes his wife literally dying in front of him and reminding him why, you know, he's done all of this work, why he's been through all of this.
Why he can't just pretend like it all doesn't exist. Why he can't just give up or take a shortcut or just like escape to this place that just doesn't exist. He has to like face the world like he told her that they both should.
Yeah, and you could get the idea that this false world is just like a projection of what he wants. And, you know, if we take further the idea that all of this is metaphorical, basically he's just been drinking his life away for, you know, the entire night or whatever, like just sort of trying to escape from going home, because going home will remind him of sort of the, you know, the compromises he's had to make and the world he has to live in.
Right.
Like, not necessarily because his wife is there, but just because that's the point where he has to accept all of the things in his life from then on.
He doesn't get to be a cop anymore. Even if he was, it's not the world that he'd want it to be in. Right,
he doesn't get to be the detective or the cop that he wants to be. So yeah, it's interesting to look at sort of the different pieces of this and how they ultimately play into the narrative. Like, and that comes down to like, the ending reveals a ton, and I want to know what your thoughts at the end are. Is it all a metaphor, or is it this sort of like this realism fantasy sort of blend that the fears of the people can turn into a literal monster that kind of consumes them all? Like, what's your own personal opinion on what happens?
I think it is all a metaphor. Like, I feel like if I ever like go back and rewatch this anime, which I don't know, I might do,
with a break for sure.
Right. That's how I'm gonna view it, as like there are lines between this reality and this fantasy, and I'm gonna have to draw them for myself for sure, but I feel like that's what I'm going to do when it, like, that's what I do with this.
Yeah, I think that certainly like the more introspective sort of like take on this series is the one where it is all a group of people who decide that they have found an easy out for their problems, and not so much that he is a literal monster. And I think the pieces work out really well in that way.
Right. The equation fits.
Right. It was fascinating, like, kind of getting to the end of an episode and going like, oh, that's why the equation thing goes on, because you don't really know why the old man's so important, but he is, in some ways, predicting all of the major deaths up until his sickness takes him.
Right. Until his own death.
Right.
Which causes more changes. What?
Oh, and his, he doesn't show up in the episode, he doesn't come up with Ushiyama's attack, and he doesn't come up with, Kasami's attack, because they aren't by the real Low Slugger. Like, clearly he has some kind of connection to the whole thing.
Right.
It's a fascinating thing to explore from different angles, but I think I agree with the idea of watching it back. The big reveal is that, the attacks are all committed by the victims, and just trying to find a way to escape from the reality that they live in.
Right. Just trying to find like a relief or an exit.
And I think sort of the biggest one of that, where it's like you really get the sense that this is sort of their perfect situation, is with Taiko. Because Taiko, I think, has the most sort of tragic ultimately, like, backstory that goes along with this, that plays into sort of like Masami's episode, and the way that we see how dirty he can get and how villainous he can be with sort of his attacks on people, the presumed rape, like, and then it comes down to, she loves him so much because she sees him as this hero. He's winning things for her. He's so happy to, she's so happy to be doing graduation with them. And when she finds out that he's like basically, taking video of her in her room in, like a personal space that, isn't supposed to be divided.
Right.
It comes to this head where it's like, well, suddenly are all the other things that he's said to me, are lies, are all of these based around sort of this weird sexual attraction he has, She feels disgusted by the fact that, she was so enamored that she, had this juvenile thought of marriage with him,
Right. And, like, she didn't mind sleeping in the same room as him, and it's just...
Right, which, just becomes more and more uncomfortable, all these little bits, as it comes down to it, and, like, expecting him to save her, like, when those bullies come in the flashback, like, it's a whole huge thing, and, kind of everyone sort of has a tragic part to their story. Even if you might feel that, like, some of it is justified, like Ichi being the biggest dick in class. Clearly he's not, like, a good kid, but he's not a murderer.
Right.
And he just ends up being unjustly like unfairly judged by his peers.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's like, you know, it's interesting to look at this after the fact because there is just so much to unpack with it. And you have sort of like, and like even the, I guess even the goofy episode, Happy Family Planning, like, we just see sort of like Tokyo in the wake of this whole thing. We see kind of all around the way that other people are committing suicide and the way that other people are dissatisfied with life.
Like, people are just giving up so easily. Like, you see these three, and, like, it doesn't seem like they have, like, all that much wrong with their life. Like, it seems like they honestly, like, can still find a lot of joy in life, but they still result to suicide.
Yeah, like, the only one of them that, like, is given, like, an explanation for sort of the reason to kill themselves is Zebra. And this actually, I'm not sure where this information comes from because I didn't catch it in my watch. But Zebra being a gay man who ends up like breaking up with his lover, who's then seen later sleeping with the Yakuza head from Masami's episode.
So after Zebra tries to kill himself with that's the whole episode.
Zebra tries to kill himself specifically with like the meds. Right, you said that, or you which one?
Oh, actually, it might be with the meds. I don't remember.
But he opens like a locket, you said, right?
A locket.
And it's him and another man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I missed that on my watch.
You see that man later with the Yakuza, when the Yakuza gets eaten by the TV goo.
Right. And something else a little bit interesting just about that episode is in the UK, it had to cut the entire scene of their attempt to hang themselves. Just due to like some kind of some, you know, like the whatever their FCC equivalent is.
Yeah, at least it wasn't like they had to. We're attached to a giant sandwich and we have to chase after it.
Right, but I think that one in particular, just because it's the only scene in that episode in which the Kamome actually like is active in trying to kill herself. Like it is, you know. Like, the other ones, it's like, oh, they don't actually do it. But in that one, it's like, yes, I am hanging from this. So I see why that, of all things, would end up getting cut.
Yeah, it makmakes sense.
And they, you know, like, they cut the boobies from the English version of episode 1. Yeah, like, the like, frames of boobies that show up. Oh, I can't believe it. Yeah, it's just like, you know, there's a little bit of kind of censorship there just because, yeah, it is a very, like, tough series. Like, you know, and it's never super explicit with its stuff, but it is very heavy in its theming and its choices. I think, this is something that maybe I'm not smart enough to really discuss, just because I don't have the knowledge for it, but, like when they talk about how the sort of ruined Tokyo is like just after the war, I think part of that is sort of the like the Japanese mindset that they were in the right for the whole thing. You know, they and this has come up in other media about World War II about it as sort of like, or like at least the general public, because of the way that the propaganda worked. It was like, you know, we haven't done anything wrong. We're just trying to, you know, we were just doing, you know, what's best for the country.
Right. Just trying to get by.
Yeah, and the political leaders followed the same thing. It's this whole situation ultimately about, you know, the passing of blame. Like, you know, we did what was best for us. You know, it can't be blamed on us because we were dragged into this or whatever. It's so, I don't have enough of knowledge to really expound on that, but like, you know, this is something that I think has a lot of cultural ties to its origin that do, that are, I think, relatable enough to also relate to the American audience, but also that run into these occasional problems where, you know, it's And as an extension of your problems, your failures as well. It's a situation of feeling, feeling trapped, feeling cornered, and wanting an excuse that gets you out of that. But ultimately learning that you have to deal with it yourself. Like, I've certainly had my own fair share of problems where I've tried to, like, fake my way out of a problem, and it's actually just gotten worse for me. This one's, like, really minor, but I remember in 6th grade, I failed a reading exam because I didn't I basically hadn't done the reading that was required of me. And I tried to fake one of my parents' signatures.
Oh.
And it was, I was like, oh, well, my dad's signature is too illegible for me to, like, be able to recreate. So I'll fake my stepmom's one. And she's Vietnamese, and at the time, I still didn't know how to spell her last name, because Nguyen, as a young child, is very hard to... So I misspelled it, my teacher found out, and then my parents found out, like, and it spirals into kind of a worse situation. And that's a very small version of what Paranoia Agent is about. It's just, like, when you avoid these problems and you try to make up stories and, kind of, like, make excuses for the things that happen, like, it may make you feel better for a little bit, but ultimately all it's going to do is make it harder then to deal with these problems later.
Right. You need to confront your problems.
Yeah, that's kind of the big thing about Paranoia Agent, is just learning to confront problems and learning to kind of learning when it's acceptable and unacceptable to sort of, like, find these crutches and find these, excuses to get away. Because, like, Moromi is a impermanent fixture in people's lives. People eventually are going to get bored, and Moromi is going to become stale. And then what's left, if they don't have to face their problems, ultimately, what are they going to have to do? It's all going to go into a panic, and it would be just like the ending, with or without Moromi just suddenly disappearing.
Right.
It's finding the new
Eventually
crutch.
you gotta face your problems, or Tokyo's gonna get gooed.
Right. Or wherever you live. Be worried.
Right.
It could at any point turn into goo. Mm-hmm. You could create a giant buff child that will attack others.
So yeah, just be careful.
Yeah. And, I wish that this was a series more accessible to, like, home video or streaming. Because, like, with the rights, in limbo, it's just a situation where there's just nothing to grab.
Right. I mean, we had to go back in time and watch this on Adult Swim, and that took weeks of our lives.
Right. It took a long time.
Right. We couldn't find a shortcut, like watching it on a torrent site or something. We had to do this.
We had to do it in our real-time machine.
Mm-hmm.
Where we went backwards in real time.
Right.
It took a while, but we eventually got there. But, like, the old DVDs technically are still out there, but they cost, $50, $60 in order to get. And there aren't many out there, and, it's just one of those things where I feel like someone should have grabbed it and made it accessible by this point, because it's, like, I guess that's kind of true of all of Satoshi Kon's work. The only one that's really readily accessible is Paprika. I guess being his latest one, that's the benefit of that. But, like, if you look to try to get, I don't know, Perfect Blue, his first movie, like, DVD copies of that in English start at, like, $90.
Oh, geez.
And all the other ones are imports, so they're, they might not have, English subtitles or what you want out of it. So it's just one of those situations where I feel like Satoshi Kon
you have to settle for the famous Flash animation Perfect Kirby.
Right. And, like, so it's just one of those situations where, like, it's really unfortunate that someone so celebrated doesn't have their work represented in like, kind of American culture, or, like, outside of Japan. Mm-hmm. Like, it seems like the UK still has a distributor for Paranoia Agent, but it just seems very strange that, like, some of these aren't accessible. And it's nice, in some ways that Amazon with their new anime service has picked up some of these movies for streaming. So there's at least some way
that's good.
Some way to access as far back as like Tokyo Godfathers, which is nice because that is, a place for that movie to be, but also that still means we're missing out on Perfect Blue, we're missing out on Millennium Actress. Like there's, there are some gaps in there, and I'd really like to see those fulfilled, because after seeing this, I'm really interested to see what he does with a more focused sort of art form, because his directing style and the way that he like cuts and frames shots is like,
there's just so much energy in this anime, which I really love.
And like it's got good thematic elements, and again, just like good, even like some really good transitions that I feel like within the confines of a film can be even more expanded upon, because it can be more ambitious with more work put into it in total.
Mm-hmm.
It's it really does show like Satoshi Kon's like, work and his effort and how good he was at what he did. And it's a shame that more of that just isn't accessible. Because it also does have like things to say socially. There's a lot of talk about sort of his first couple movies sort of being explorations of the way that the male gaze affects culture and the way that we see like celebrity. And we see things in here sort of like, societal complications with learning to, accept ourselves and our problems and try not to push them away and things like that. And like Tokyo Godfathers is about the way that we define families. Like there's so much in there that is something that he wants to say about Japanese culture that expands even further into sort of like worldwide culture that's being missed by these sorts of things not being easily accessible. But yeah, man, Paranoia Agent was a trip. It wasn't what I expected at all.
No, not at all.
Because I definitely expected it just from the way it had been described to be, I guess...
like a horror?
Yeah, a lot more horror and a lot more literal, I think. Mm-hmm. Like, I didn't expect it to be so like... Figurative and sort of like something that recontextualizes itself at the end as like, maybe none of this was real. Like it, like knowing that he sort of did, like Inception before Inception with Paprika. Like, it's like, sure, there's like a blend of what's real, what's not, and sort of the effect. And that comes through really well on a first watch up to when things start to go crazy, and then it redefines everything earlier.
Yeah.
So it's a very cool series in that way. And it's just, it's a real art, it's art.
Like, I feel like I've never really watched like anything like this before. Like not even just anime or whatever. Just, I feel like I really have never seen a piece of media that like I've experienced like quite the same way, where it feels like sort of like I take it literally, and then like by the end of it, I have to take it figuratively, or else like it doesn't make sense. And then once I do, it changes the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think what this also shows is that like maybe I should start getting into David Lynch too, who is compared frequently to Satoshi Kon one way or the other, as sort of like these masters of filmmaking and directing, and sort of like
I hear he's the Sweary of movies.
Has anyone said that? But yeah, it's so like, David Lynch as a director does sort of the similar thing where you don't know what to trust about what you're seeing, as far as I understand. And I think that's something really cool that just is like the sort of thing where you're not going to see that a lot. Like sort of, it's kind of a once in a lifetime sort of person that you meet that can do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really enjoyed my time with Paranoia Agent. Like, I try to spread these things out when I'm watching them just so I can sort of like have a fresh perspective on them. But it's one of the series where like after every episode it's like, well, I want to see the next one. Like it has that drawing power to you to make it really easy to binge.
Yeah, like I feel like like for the first like 5 episodes, I was just like, okay, and what next? And what next? And what next?
Yeah, it's it was cool. I'm really happy that I ended up watching this.
Yeah, I am too, and I'm glad I watched it and was able to discuss it with a buddy. Like we didn't watch it together,
right?
But we watched it in spirit together,
right? And we got to talk about it because I think, especially with a show like this, it benefits from sort of talking about it afterwards, sort of piecing our thoughts together. Because like, you know, even as we're doing the recap, we're both coming up with like, oh, so that's what that was. And oh, you know, that suddenly that makes a lot more sense to read it this way.
Right. Like, I feel like I honestly, I learned more about this show, like talking about it with you than I did the first time watching it almost.
Yeah, I get that, because it's definitely like, you know, you catch different things depending on when you watch and who you watch it with. So it was something cool to see out of this. And we got a fan mail about this, but I feel like we already mostly talked about it. This is from Ristix. Ristix asked, when you finish the series, the prophetic vision after the credits invites you to rewatch the series again, except now you're enlightened to certain details of the story. This leads me to my question, do you know of any episodes in particular that strike you more when you see the series again in this way? And I'm trying to think of, like, which episode is, like, the most evocative in a way that once you know that, you know, or once you have an idea that they're attacking themselves to avoid conflict, which one is sort of the biggest surprise?
Well, I mean, I feel like the biggest surprise would probably be like episode 8, where like you'd be looking for like, oh, well, if they were dead the whole time, then
yeah,
is this that? But I think maybe episode 3 for like the actual death, because I don't know, like I feel like there's a lot of ways to like read that. Like maybe like I think like maybe like Harumi might not even like have a different personality. Like maybe she's
living her own double life.
Right, like she's actually just afraid of like this commitment that she's making with somebody that she feels like she doesn't really know.
Yeah, okay, that's not a way I had thought about reading that. But yeah, it could be seen as that, and like, you know, sort of Maria is the side of her that kind of like wants to have fun. Like they say that's the, you know, she says she's the real one. So if we see that Harumi is sort of the public face that she gives to try to feel like she fits in more and is more comfortable, then there's definitely like a new perception to that of like having to try to like come to terms with who she is versus who she wants to be, and, you know, trying to kind of plant her feet in the ground as like, this is who I am because I'm getting married, I need this kind of thing.
Right.
And I think also like not only the episode 8 learning that Makoto was on that suicide blog, but then also realizing that it's possible all of these deaths were self-inflicted is a big surprise.
Right.
Because the fact that they see Little Slugger doesn't mean that he's actually there, but more like, oh, well, you know, this is the, you know, we think that Little Slugger left here. And, you know, the death of this kid, like, it seems like, oh, well, he wanted to commit suicide, and maybe he did. Maybe he actually was able to, like, after having completed everything, but also, like, having sort of failed his sensational, leave.
He is, like emotionally, like, he's just, like, he's been torn apart by this police, and he just, like, it's understandable that he would have no idea, like, what to do left.
Right, because if you want to commit suicide early, it's like, oh, I want to go out with a bang, I want to do something sensational. And then to have that just completely lost because it turns out he faked it, you know, and they finally push him to admit it, and he can't live in this sort of, like, illusion of grandeur. He's lost his goal, and so he kills himself. Like, that, I think, is like a big one to put all the pieces together on.
Also, I just wanted to say Illusion of Grandeur is my favorite Super Nintendo RPG.
That's a really good name for one. But yeah, I think that's all I can think of to say. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on before we go?
No, I don't really think so. I do think that this is a really good anime, and I guess if you haven't seen it already,
find a way to watch it.
And I guess you could have watched like half of it instead of listening to us talk about it. Whoops.
Yeah, I mean, sure, you could have. But you didn't. You listened to us, and we thank you for that.
Right, you took the shortcut, and the goo's coming for you,
yeah, watch
buddy.
out, little slugger's coming for you. And yeah, I think one thing that we touched on a little bit, but should be noted, is like it's a really good English dub. Like it's done up there with the best of them.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of a shame that I feel like Adult Swim's anime dubs haven't been that great recently. Like watching this like shows like sort of like it feels like they've kind of fallen in some ways. But I guess this was made in like what, 2004? It's been over 10 years, so
yeah, a lot's changed.
Yeah, only something to be expected.
And I think there's definitely a difference between then where sort of like there's a handful of voice actors who are doing it and like doing it well, and now where people grow up wanting to do voice work in anime, so you have a lot more kind of variable work as more people are sort of like, they're not maybe trained actors in the same way that I think a lot more of these voice actors are. And it's more of it's one of those things where, you know, eventually the chops will get up to more people having this sort of quality, but just like the voices in here are really evocative and work really well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's cool, yeah. But yeah, so where can people on the internet find you?
Well, I'm the J of Spade. You can find me at that Twitter. Just do at the J of Spade. I also have a Let's Play channel where me and Chorps have been Let's Playing Gravity Rush for probably around 6 months now. It's almost done.
Also very anime.
Right, very anime. And, has it all been real?
Whoa!
But that's at the J of Spade LP on YouTube. I guess that's about it. Yeah.
And as always, you can find me at Chorpsaway, CHORPSAWAY on Twitter. And you can find Coco Disaster at Coco_disaster on Twitter, like the food product, COCOA. And, you know, from there you can find our website, which is also cocodisaster.com, where we have the archives you can find our text, our text blog at Vanilla Blessing on Tumblr, where I just write about whatever I want, I guess. You can find links to the RSS feed, and you can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever you get podcasts. And if you have the time, it would be great if you could leave a review, a rating, and if there's anything that you think we can improve on or work on, you can always email the podcast at chorpsawaysa@gmail.com. That's chorpsawaysa@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to look them over.
Right, and remember, if we get 100 reviews on iTunes, Chorps is gonna eat an anime DVD.
It's true. I'll just devour one whole.
Right. Well, I mean, you're gonna put like lox and cheese on it, of course.
Well,
I'm not an animal.
Jesus. But yeah. So it's been great doing this with you, Jay.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Even if it maybe ran a bit longer than I expected.
It's very hot in this room.
I'm sorry. We'll take care of that. Coming up next will be the seasonal coverage. Zane will be back, and we'll talk about the upcoming fall titles. There's a lot of stuff even just now that looks pretty exciting. So we'll be interested in covering those. But until then, keep your feet on the ground and avoid any bat-wielding children. I've been Shorps Away.
I'm Jay.
And sweet dreams.